Mr. Klein.
The gentleman and I have similar questions today. And oh, by the way, let's work on that reauthorization. I'll send over a proposal. I may have a few changes to propose in that reauth. But
maybe that's a good idea for us not to be thinking about it.
Given that ATF claims it can barely keep up with the workload of inspecting the current number of licensed dealers, what is the point of this new rule? Is it actually to encourage firearm sellers to become licensed or to discourage them from engaging in the constitutionally protected activity of selling and trading in firearms at all?
The purpose of the new rule is to implement the definitional change brought by the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, which changed the definition of being engaged in the business from engaged in the business for the purpose of maintaining a livelihood to being engaged in the business for the predominant purpose of earning a profit. With that change, it required regulations explaining what that means.
Okay.
The purpose is to prevent guns from being sold to prohibited persons without a background check to be sure that a prohibited person doesn't get a gun. That includes somebody who served time as a violent felon, for example.
Okay. The rule also institutes a series of rebuttable presumptions to supposedly clarify when the licensing requirement attaches to gun sales, but these presumptions appear nowhere in statute to the degree that they have any legal foundation at all. They're said to interpret the old, not the currently existing language on who is a dealer. And the rule itself estimates that tens of thousands of firearm sellers will be required to become licensed dealers under its terms, which would obviously necessitate a significant increase in ATF oversight as well. Did ATF coordinate with the FBI or seek their input on the capacity of NICS, the background check system, to absorb the additional workload this rule would create? It seems that it would have a cascading effect on a variety of departments and divisions and their workload.
Yeah, I believe that the department's regulation discusses workload impact. I don't know this answer to the specific question you're asking, and I'll try to have somebody get back to you on that specific question.
And I would just express concern that this seems to be an end run around the authority of Congress to set the laws rather than the department, and especially when it comes to the constitutionally protected rights of American citizens to keep and bear arms. I think your actions are headed in the wrong direction. So,
right. Just to be clear, this is really not about the Second Amendment in any respect. It's about implementing Congress's statute and the prohibitions on selling guns to people who Congress has said should not have them. It's not about
when you
otherwise.
Keep and bear arms, you have to purchase and sell. And that's part of keeping and bearing arms. So I would just urge you to keep that in mind.
Chairman Adderholt.
Thank you. General Garland, good to have you here. Thanks for your time. I want to focus on something I don't think we've any questions have been so far, and that's on the Bureau of Prisons. And I understand, according to the Bureau of Prison website, there are less than 35,000 employees to ensure the security of all the federal prisons and services that include 156,000 federal inmates. What steps is the Bureau of Prison taking to address gaps in correctional officer and training and leader training? And is there a reason that the Bureau of Prisons correctional leaders have not participated in the Prison Fellowship Warden Exchange, which is offered without cost to the federal government?
I'm sorry, I don't know about the latter question that you asked, but I'll be happy to have our staff look into it on the warden training and get in touch with you. We have the pandemic delayed Bureau of Prisons' ability to provide in-person training, but BOP has since resumed many in-person trainings and is trying to clear the backlog in that respect. You are right with respect to the number of employees we have in the Bureau of Prisons. It's really not sufficient. It's not sufficient either for the necessary protection, or for the educational programs that we have. And as I discussed earlier with another member of the panel, the problem here is recruitment, retention, and promotion. And I think that the most important thing that the committee can do is to give us the money that we're asking for hiring and retention incentives.
Do you know of any law or regulation that prevents or limits the Bureau of Prisons from accepting donations or services or programs from a nonprofit as long as they don't accept federal funds?
I'm afraid I don't know about that, but I'd be happy to have our staff look into that and get back to your staff.
Okay, if you could look at it and see if there is examples where their community or faith-based programs could be helpful. My understanding is that as long as they don't receive federal funds, then there are programs out there to be of assistance. And I would appreciate you looking into that and let me know if that was something that might be possible, because I think it is could be real helpful. Of course, back on October the 7th of last year, we all know what happened, and along with the attack on Israel, there were 30 Americans that were killed by Hamas terrorists in Israel as part of a larger coordinated attack that left 1,200 Israelis dead and over 200 abducted. And it is my understanding that 8 Americans remain hostage in Gaza. I understand 3 of whom are no longer alive. But you announced that the Justice Department was investigating the death and the kidnappings of the Americans during the attack. Can you give us here on the subcommittee an update on the investigation into the death and kidnapping of those Americans? And is the Justice Department looking to pursue criminal charges against individuals responsible for those attacks?
So the killing or kidnapping of Americans abroad is a federal crime. So, of course, that is what we're investigating, as I said, for potential criminal prosecution. We have been involved in discussions with Israeli law enforcement and intelligence services to help us get evidence and information in this regard. I really can't say anything more about the progress of the investigation, but this is a matter of extreme concern for us. This was in addition, of course, to the killing of the Americans, this was the largest mass killing of Jews since the Holocaust.
Can you say that that the department is pursuing criminal charges against these individuals?
We're investigating that. We have a criminal investigation in connection with the deaths and kidnapping of Americans in Israel on October 7th.
Can you speak more broadly to the department's work in investigating Hamas threats to the U.S., including efforts by Hamas to raise money in the U.S.?
Yes. Just at a high level of generality, because I don't want to talk about matters that I can't talk about in an open session, but we do have investigations, financial investigations with respect to Hamas, which we've had for a number of years. October 7th, as the FBI director noted in his testimony, has raised our threat level considerably with respect to concerns of foreign terrorist organizations like Hamas that might foment problems in the United States. That includes not only Hamas, but Hezbollah, the Iranian Quds Force, ISIS, ISIS-K, various sects of branches of Al-Qaeda. We are concerned and are making sure that all of our joint terrorism task forces are on the lookout for these matters since October 7th. There was a heightened concern before October 7th, but obviously October 7th has only redoubled our concern here.
Thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Ruppersberger.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Attorney General Garland, my colleague, Congressman Chip Roy, has twice requested a copy of the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act prosecution data. He first asked for it in October of 2022, and then again 2 months ago on February the 16th. He has yet to receive this data, and my question to you is, when will this data be provided by the Department of Justice?
I don't know specifically about the request, but like the other request you asked about, I'm very happy to look into this.
And provide the data.
I'm sorry?
And provide the data.
Of course, if we have the
Okay,
data.
great. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
In the FBI's request, FY25 request, in the Department of Justice's budget, you're requesting $437.6 million for protecting civil rights. That's an increase from what I see here. Under the civil rights heading in the FBI's request, it says color of law violations are actions taken by any person using the authority given to them by a government agency to willfully deprive someone of a right. Now, since you've been Attorney General, has anyone in the government or otherwise been prosecuted for a color of law violation for denying people their Second Amendment rights? That's a civil right.
I understand that. I don't know the answer to that, but, and I have not heard that there has been that kind of prosecution.
Okay, well, since the SCOTUS decision overturning the New York law, which was the New York Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin, which denied New Yorkers their constitutional rights, I would think that there would be a case there. So I would ask the Department of Justice to look into that, because the Second Amendment is a civil right. And when people are denied that civil right, then I think under the Civil Rights Division, the Department of Justice should engage. Now, also, in last year's congressional hearing, I asked about your department's most recent congressional authorization. Has your department been reauthorized, or is the most recent authorization the one that expired in FY 2009?
I will say you taught me something about authorizations and appropriations at the last hearing that I did not know. My understanding is that that was the last authorization, the one you're talking about. Of course, the Justice Department would always like to have an authorization. My understanding is that the yearly appropriations count as authorizations, but of course, it would always be better for any entity to have a formal authorization.
Well, we're not an authorizing committee. We are an appropriating committee. It's the Judiciary Committee that is the authorizing committee for Department of Justice. So DOJ remains unauthorized, and you're running an unauthorized agency by the department, or excuse me, by the Judiciary Committee. So are you going to seek a new congressional authorization from the Judiciary Committee?
I haven't had those kind of discussions. I'll be happy to take that back and think about it. Again, given the appropriations, I've been advised that that's not required, but I'll be happy to think about it some more.
Okay, thank you, and I yield back.
Mr. Borelli? And the chair recognizes the ranking member of the full committee, Ms. DeLauro.
Thank you very much. A lot of hearings happening at the same time, but delighted that you're here this morning. And what I wanted to look at is the issue of crime, if you will, and trade. DOJ plays a critical role in deterring crime through robust investigations, prosecutions, incarcerations, and the application of penalties. My concern about DOJ that there may be some serious blind spots and lack of resources in critical areas, particular the U.S. international trade enforcement. Example, 2022 U.S. imports were $3.27 trillion. Conservative estimates based on available data from Economic Policy Institute projected 5 to 10% of those imports were fraudulent. This means that there's annually $163 to $327 billion in illegal trade, which impacts U.S. workers, manufacturers, consumers, and our free trade partners. I understand DOJ's infrastructure to combat trade crimes is lightly resourced. 2022, U.S. Customs and Border Protection collected $19.4 million in penalties on $3.27 trillion of trade. That seems to me to be a drop in the bucket. I understand that international trade prosecutions are also low to non-existent. Couple of questions. Can you give us a sense of DOJ resources you are using to prosecute these bad actors associated with crimes that violate trade laws? How do you work with CBP and HSI to increase the number of prosecutions? Would you say, based on DHS enforcement data, that combating international trade crime is a priority within DOJ? Why or why not? And how familiar are you with DOJ's efforts and resources dedicated to investigating and prosecuting international trade crimes? What's your assessment of the department's actions, including the number of prosecutions and penalties? Thank you.
You put your finger on an important risk to our economy, which is fraudulent traded goods. That's why we have a trade fraud task force, which enhances collaboration between the Justice Department and the other agencies that you were discussing to investigate trade fraud. It helped initiate more than 70 investigations involving hundreds of millions of dollars of fraudulently imported goods. One good example is just last month, the Ford Motor Company agreed to pay $365 million to settle customs civil penalty claims related to misclassified and undervalued items. So I recognize the significance of this for our economy, and I believe our Justice Department task force is working well with other departments on this matter, including the Department of Homeland Security.
Do you have enough personnel to take on this issue and resources in a more robust way? As I said, $3.27 trillion. We collect $19.4 million. That seems to be some great disparity. And I'm just asking.
No.
What do you need,
Yeah.
from us to be able to deal with this area on international trade, where we're getting killed?
Look, the Justice Department always like more money.
I understand that, but
But,
we need an assessment.
Yeah,
of
I think that the money that we're requesting for our civil divisions, Consumer Protection Branch, which deals with civil, this kind of fraud, and our criminal divisions fraud section, which deals with this on the criminal side, and the U.S. Attorney's offices that deal with this in each of the 94 districts, and the FBI's corporate crime and fraud sections. Given the budget priorities, I think we're asking for the appropriate amount. There's obviously always trade-offs, but we are I think, able to fund a robust program. The most difficult aspect of this, of course, is identifying the fraudulent goods as they come in. And that really is a customs and therefore a Homeland Security issue. And they, I'm sure, would say the same to you, that they need more money for this purpose.
I'm going to like to pursue that. I'm just going to say something very quickly. I'm running out of time. As you know, antitrust received, this is antitrust division, roughly a 4% increase in 2024 over the prior year. I want to ensure that we can continue to justify these critical investments, protect consumers from unfair and anti-competitive business practices. Do I have your commitment that we can work together? I would like to work with you and with my staff on answering questions that we have on what resources the Antitrust Division, and frankly, this could apply to all of DOJ, that you will need for 2025.
Yes, of course. We're very eager to speak with you about that. The total we've requested is $288 million, which is an increase of $55 million over the enacted FY24. I will say I've always been concerned about this. I entered the Justice Department in 1979, and we barely have more attorneys in the Antitrust Division now than we had in 1979. I think this is the first year we've been able to bring the number up to the number of attorneys we had when I first entered the department.
Mm-hmm. But we'd like to work with you on how well we can track the resources that are necessary for you to be able to do your job. And as a final comment, I'm very, very interested. Last night, listened to the FTC commissioner and about the working together with DOJ, because we have serious issues which affect consolidation, which raises prices in this nation, makes anti-competitiveness a reality, and how between DOJ and the FTC we can address these issues in a very, very robust, strong way to get at ending these monopolies, if you will, that only increase prices for the American people. Thank you very much. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman Adderholt.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Ranking Member Cartwright, and thank you, Attorney General Garland, for appearing here today, and thank you for your patience as you deal with this committee. I'm a co-chair of the bipartisan Second Chance Task Force, and we're concerned about staffing shortages at the BOP. The BOP's funded at 93%, but we're only staffed at 86%. What's happening is education, wraparound services for mental health, et cetera, which can improve our outcomes, job training, get left behind. So we're all in agreement on that. We'd like to figure out how to implement the bipartisan First Step Act successfully. And to do that, we've got to have the staffing. Could you talk a minute about what this does to lead to lousy outcomes where we can't cut our prison budget because we don't give folks a second chance to win and succeed?
Thanks for the question. I think the First Step Act was extremely important. By focusing on education of inmates, it helps reduce recidivism after people leave. And of course, if we can reduce recidivism after reentry, we can drive down the violent crime rate and prevent it from going up. The Bureau of Prisons makes every effort to ensure that the staffing shortages that you're referring to don't impact the First Step Act programming as well as the medication-assisted treatment programming. But to be frank, if you're asking me what we need most in order to protect the ability to have full staffing at the Bureau of Prisons, we need the money for hiring and retention incentives. Being a correctional officer or being a First Step administrator, these are dangerous jobs in facilities that have not been kept up over decades, and where there are adjoining facilities, sometimes state and local facilities, that pay more money. So I'd say if you're asking me for the one thing that will give us a better chance here for the First Step Act and for the Second Chance Act, it would be to give us the money that we're requesting, which is $205.4 million for hiring and retention incentives.
So quite simply, the dollars that you give you, the proper amount of money, will result in saving millions, tens of millions more down the line by cutting recidivism.
I do think that the money we have to provide more incentives for people to stay on the job in the Bureau of Prisons means that the chances of reducing recidivism will increase.
That sounds like a smart investment to me. Second quick question. 75% of BOP inmates do not have a photo ID when they leave prison. They can't secure housing, apply for jobs, open a bank account, federal benefit programs, etc. The Bureau is addressing this by providing some IDs to U.S. citizens now. We have a bipartisan bill, the BOP Release Card Act, that supports this effort at the BOP by ensuring new IDs fulfill all the requirements and directs BOP to work with the states to have a one-on-one exchange so we can work right with the states to move these folks into getting their new ID card and then successfully be able to exchange that for state ID cards. So we would appreciate your help in moving this bill forward. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, we would be happy to give technical assistance, and I think our staffs may have already consulted on this, but of course we'd be happy to give technical assistance. The BOP has implemented its own release ID program in October of 2023, and they're on track for full implementation by this spring.
Excellent, thank you. The DEA has extended current telemedicine flexibilities for prescribing controlled medications through December 31, 24. But there's not a revised proposed rule, and many patients are at risk of losing access to prescriptions needed for mental health and substance use disorder. Last year, my colleagues and I expressed concerns about the proposed DEA rule that would have limited patient access to buprenorphine and encourage an evidence-based approach to make permanent the use of audio-only or audio-visual telehealth technology for buprenorphine prescribing. This is crucial to reach these patient populations, including unhoused, rural, tribal. So as a follow-up to that letter, we introduced the TREATS Act, which allows medication for opioid use disorder to be prescribed via telemedicine. What's DOJ's position on the continued use of telehealth flexibilities to ensure access to these medically necessary substance use disorder treatment, and how is this supported in your budget request?
So as you noted, the DEA and HHS have extended the current telemedicine flexibilities until December 31st of this year. DEA has issued a proposed rule which would allow authorized providers to prescribe medicines for opioid use disorder via telemedicine. They are working to promulgate a final final rule by the fall of this year.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. Just quickly, restrictive housing, otherwise known as solitary confinement, outdated, inhumane practice, often used way too far too often. We believe the BOP has been dragging its feet to reform this area of restrictive housing. In the past 10 years, DOJ has conducted studies and task forces to improve restrictive housing, yet we failed to make any progress. What steps can DOJ and BOP take together so we can make this more effective and improve restrictive housing policies?
Well, the new BOP director is very much committed to what you're talking about. BOP recently published a proposed rule on discipline designed to reduce the use of restrictive housing for disciplinary segregation. BOP is trying to hire more psychologists and provide de-escalation training, which would help reduce the need for restrictive housing.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I yield back.
General Garland, if you would please move the microphone closer to,
Oh, I'm sorry.
to you. We're having a little
I don't know
trouble
if I can
hearing.
I can't move the microphone.
Mrs. Ming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Cartwright. Thank you, Attorney General Garland. I wanted to ask about a bill of mine that was signed into law in 2021, the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act, which directs the Attorney General to provide guidance to state and local law enforcement agencies to bolster reporting of hate crimes. I was glad to see that the President's budget request for fiscal year 25 requests $10 million for community-based approaches to prevent and address hate crimes, a grant program that I authored in fiscal year 2022. I want to take this opportunity to thank you for your leadership in responding to violent crime and specifically hate crimes in the U.S. in the last several years. It means a great deal to Asian Americans and so many historically underserved communities to have a president and an attorney general who cares deeply about these issues. I wanted to ask a question that I also asked FBI Director Christopher Wray in last week's hearing. I'm concerned by the trend of a decrease in the number of local law enforcement agencies providing the FBI with incident data. This is the 5th year in a row that the number of local agencies providing data to the FBI has declined. I know that the decline may partially be due to the transition that agencies are making to the NIBRS system, but what additional resources does the DOJ need to support local and state law enforcement agencies using NIBRS? And I'd like to also hear more from you about other ways that the DOJ is actively working to support local law enforcement agencies in reporting hate crimes.
Yeah, well, thank you for the question, and this is a high priority for us. I do think that, as the FBI director suggested, that much of the problem is just a transition problem from one form of statistical compilation to another. But of course, all of our information has to come from state and local communities. And so what we have to do is reach out to them constantly to ensure that they are providing the numbers. The FBI and our Office of Justice Programs and Bureau of Justice Assistance have sort of identified the places that have been less compliant than they should be, and are trying to reach out to encourage that level of compliance. I think the money we have in the budget is sufficient for those kind of reach-out programs, but we won't be satisfied until all the crimes are reported.
Thank you. And just to follow up, as you've said, state and local law enforcement agencies play a crucial role in the nationwide response to hate crimes. But I also want to make sure to ask about how the DOJ works with community-based organizations, which also have a crucial part in building up community resilience and preventing future hate crimes. Can you talk about how the DOJ is coordinating with both law enforcement and local organizations to respond to hate crime?
Yeah, so each of our U.S. Attorney's offices has a civil rights and hate crimes coordinator, and each of the U.S. attorneys has been instructed to reach out to the communities to have discussions well in advance of any crisis occurring. You know, our strategy here is to develop trust within communities before something bad happens, so that if something bad happens, the community trusts law enforcement. These are joint meetings of the U.S. Attorney's offices and our various law enforcement components. As I know you know well, we have a United Against Hate campaign that the U.S. Attorney's offices are implementing and have been implementing for the past couple of years to reach out to communities in just the way that you said, so that federal law enforcement, state and local law enforcement, and communities can cooperate and work together. I've attended one of those meetings in Denver, and I've attended a couple of other meetings of community outreach in other places, including in St. Louis.
Thank you so much. And I'll quickly ask about another question about the aftermath of the China initiative. As we all know, in February 2022, the end of the China initiative was announced. And previously, an unacceptably high number of these cases ended in drop charges, dismissals, and acquittals because prosecutors could not prove allegations. Chinese American researchers and scholars who made valuable contributions in so many fields in this country for decades reported feeling targeted by a racial profiling campaign. I want to be clear, as a member of this subcommittee, I am fully supportive of the DOJ's real and necessary work to combat espionage by adversarial governments. But just want to make sure, how does the DOJ ensure that agents working on these investigations, number one, avoid wasteful investigations into legitimate academic research? And second, how is the DOJ also educating the institutions themselves and the public about the real national security threats and how they can best defend themselves and our country from these threats?
So, as you pointed out, we now have a consolidated section in the National Security Division to address the threats posed by the People's Republic of China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran, focusing our attention on all the myriad ways in which these adversaries attempt to either attack us from a cyber point of view, present efforts to harass dissidents in the United States, steal our personal identifying information and our technology. So to take the latter part of your question first, that's the way in which we're doing that. And then each U.S. Attorney's Office has a national security coordinator, and the FBI has joint terrorism task forces in each of its 54 districts. As to the more general question, we have a robust review process. All national security cases have to touch base with the National Security Division, which can review to ensure that the principles of federal prosecution, which determine which kinds of prosecution should be brought and which kinds shouldn't, are done. I want to emphasize that we do not prosecute based on the ethnicity of any person. We are only looking to prosecute people who are working for our adversaries in an effort to injure the United States. But that is not in any way a part of the ethnicity of people in the United States.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. That concludes the first round of questions. I know the general needs to be through here by 12 noon.
And I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Garcia?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Attorney General Garland, for being here today. I view these annual appropriations hearings as similar to investor briefs, annual investor briefs, right? We get to talk to you about what's going on in your organization, the money you're asking for, the past performance, the vision, the path forward. I don't think most Americans know what the Department of Justice does. I don't think most Americans know what the Attorney General does. So I went on your website and just printed out the mission statement. The mission statement of the Department of Justice is to uphold the rule of law, to keep our country safe, and to protect civil rights. Pretty straightforward, pretty simple. You've been in office since 2021. You report directly to the president, and you know your mission. For your investors, the American taxpayers, how would you grade your performance over the last 3 years relative to that mission?
Well, I would grade the work of our.
And I'm talking about you, Attorney General. With all due respect to you and your team, I have all the respect in the world for the agents in the field. They are doing God's work on a daily basis. So this line of questioning is specifically about you as someone who is on the cabinet, reports directly to the president during a period of record high crime rates. Before my colleagues across the aisle get offended, I am not talking about the agents in the field here. I think they're doing God's work. They're doing A+ with the resources that they're given and the policies that they're working under. I'm asking you, how would you grade yourself as the Attorney General of the United States?
Well, you ask about violent crime. I think what the Attorney General does with respect to violent crime is set forth a strategy for fighting violent crime and ensures that it's carried out throughout the department and throughout the country. So what I did almost immediately after I came into office.
I don't mean to cut you off, but we're short on time. I'm just asking for a grade, A through F. How are you doing?
I'm going to give myself an A, but
Okay.
With room for improvement.
Okay. Let me explain to you why I would give you an F. We just heard why Mr. Cartwright from Pennsylvania was citing the decline in crime nationwide. Your mission is to uphold the rule of law, and crossing the border is a crime. It is illegal per Penal Code 8 U.S.C. 1325. Crossing international border is a crime. We have 7.5 million people under your tenure who have come across our border. When you say there's a decline in homicides by about 20%, historic high in decline in homicides in 30 years or 50 years, whatever the number is, does that include the 75,000 people who were killed by fentanyl or poisoned by fentanyl by, in many cases, dealers who knew they actually were selling fentanyl and the victims did not? Does that decline in homicides of 20% include the 75,000 fentanyl poisonings?
I'm sure that it does not include the fentanyl poisoning.
Those were American lives lost, though, right? Who were killed by illicit drug dealers for the most part.
That's right.
So why is that not
That's right.
considered a homicide?
Our U.S. Attorney's offices do pursue fentanyl traffickers, and including even the sale of small amounts where we can establish that the trafficker is the one who caused the death.
Do you charge them with homicide when that's the case?
There's a narcotics statute that includes a sentencing enhancement for death. We don't prosecute homicides; those are state law.
Okay, so I just want to be clear, when we're putting the cape on and saying there's a 20% reduction in homicides, we are not counting the 75,000 Americans that have been killed by this drug over each year.
I don't believe
the second metric of keeping our country safe. We talk about the deaths to America chants in some of our cities. We heard Ray's testimony last year that we're in one of the most precarious positions our nation has been in our nation's history in the last several decades. We have 10,000 people entering our border a day illegally, 7,000% increase in Chinese immigrants coming across our border illegally, 10,000 people a day coming across the borders. And that's about a 40% increase since your watch began in FY21. 350 people on the known terror watch list. 8 in 10 Americans feel less secure than they did just 3 or 4 years ago per the Pew Research Center. So your assessment of yourself, I think someone who is in your position, literally reports directly to the president. An attribute of a leader in that position has to be self-aware. They have to have the courage to tell the boss that the boss is screwing up, especially when it's leading to the loss of lives at a level that is unprecedented. And I think you're giving yourself an A, and under these circumstances demonstrates a lack of self-awareness, frankly. I think you've earned an F. I think you need to talk to your boss and tell them that the policies are killing us. It's not the lack of money. I respect the $37 billion investment request here. is in charge, I'd give you more, but it's the policies that are broken. And so with that, I'm out of time. I'm happy to discuss more things, but I will wait for the second round to talk about the treatment of law and the application of law to certain demographics, and I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Morelli?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to yield some time to Mr. Cartwright.
Yeah, and I'd like to give the Attorney General a chance to respond to what he just heard.
Yeah. So I didn't hear a question in that at all, and I disagree with almost everything that you've said. But I want to be clear that the border responsibility, you're talking to the wrong department here. The Department of Homeland Security is the department responsible for preventing things from coming across the border. The President and the Secretary of Homeland Security have proposed a bipartisan bill to protect the border, to reduce the number of people who come across, and to increase the money spent to prevent fentanyl from coming across the border. So that would be my recommendation in that respect.
And I'll yield back to Mr. Morelli.
Chair, welcome, Mr. Attorney General. It is good that you're here, and I appreciate that you're here. Thank you. I noticed that President Biden's budget request for the Justice Department states that its goal is to uphold the rule of law. I appreciate this goal, but I don't see a budget that truly supports this vision. I see cuts to resources for local law enforcement who are struggling right now. I see the elimination of a program that helps put criminal, illegal aliens in jail. And I'm seeing cuts like these in favor of more spending to fulfill President Biden's political goals. Smart and responsible budget cuts are important, but if you really want to uphold the law, cuts to law enforcement programs aren't the right place to start. For example, your funding request for the Community-Based Violence Intervention and Prevention Initiative is $110 million more than the funding you're seeking for the Regional Information Sharing Systems Program, known as RISC. RISC is a proven communications program that helps state and local law enforcement combat criminal activity. As nice as community intervention programs are, they'll never replace the men and women in uniform who hold the thin blue line every single day. The President's request actually tries to cut funding for the RISC program by several $1 million. Did the department assess a reduced need for RISC funding for FY25? Because that's not what I'm hearing from Nebraska sheriffs.
I have to say that funding for state and local police is a high priority for the Justice Department. We're asking for more than $4.3 billion in funding for state and local police and $16.5 billion in the mandatory program over 5 years. We're asking for an increase in our cops hiring program of 893.5%. $2.5 billion total, $2.3 billion increase. That money goes for state and local police hiring. We're asking for $524.5 million for burden JAG grants, $323 million, a $7.5 million increase for our Office of Violence Against Women grants, which focus on local law enforcement and prosecutors. We've asked for $133 million for our public safety officers benefit program.
I know, excuse me, I have limited time, but I know there are a number of programs out there, but specifically to the RISC program, which is a program that really offers secure information sharing and communications capabilities, investigative support services, and that all enhances our officer safety. And so what I'm hearing is the priority for that program, which we're looking at a $4 million decrease, and the President's requesting $40 million. You compare that to the Community-Based Violence Intervention Prevention Initiative, that has increased a top line to $250 million over 5 years. So why we're looking at, in the FY24 budget, $0 for that program, we're now looking at $150 million increase in that program. So I'm just curious if you reach out to local law enforcement, which I know you do, but do you hear a priority being for the RISC program as well?
I'm sorry and maybe even embarrassed to say that I'm not sufficiently familiar with the RISC program. I have spoken constantly. We meet quarterly with state and local law enforcement, and I've gone to more than 40 U.S. attorneys' offices to meet with state and local. This issue hasn't been raised for me, but I will ask my staff to get back to you. Many of the things you're talking about sound like things that are also covered by the other grant programs, but
You know, we also face issues because of the chaos that we see at our southern border. There's a program that you have there. It's one of the few programs that help states with that. It's the State Criminal Alien Assistance Program, which the president has proposed to cut funding to that entirely. Reason being that it's a duplicative program. My time is out, but I'd like to submit a couple more questions to you if you could respond to it, and specifically that program, because we are seeing across this country, cities, states, seeing increased needs for these assistance programs because of the chaos that we see at our border, and to find one that, again, is working for my state, and to see that being cut, I'd like to explore the answers that you provide for that.
I'll be happy to answer the question.
Thank you, sir, very much.
Thank you, Senator Fisher.
Madam Chair, if I could,
Yes.
I realize I confused my answer to the senator's question about the House bill for 702, because there have been
Please
quite a
clarify.
number of House bills. The one that passed the House is the one that we do very strongly support. It's the one that passed last week, and I do urge the Senate to pass that bill.
Well, thank you for that clarification. Senator Coons.
Thank you, Chair Shaheen. Thank you so much, Attorney General Garland.
Nice to see you again. Thank you for being here. Your current budget, by my calculations, is $48.3 billion. Is that right?
The budget request is for $37.8 billion, the FY25 budget, and that would constitute a 3.5% increase over
But with mandatory spending, your budget's 48.3. Is that right?
I don't have the number for including mandatory, but I'll certainly be able to get back to you for that.
Well, let's take out mandatory.
Yeah.
Your discretionary budget right now is $37.8 billion.
The FY25 request is for 37.8.
That's not what I'm asking.
I'm sorry?
What's your current budget?
Well, it's 3.5% less than that, so I can take out my calculator and do the math, but I don't have it in front of me.
All right, well, let me put it another way. You're asking for an extra $467 million, is that right?
In the increased amount of money that we're asking for, that's approximately right, yes.
Okay. To your knowledge, in the past, let's say 40 years, has the Department of Justice ever come before Congress and said, we don't need any more? We're going to make it with what we've got in light of the fiscal circumstances in the country?
I normally wouldn't want to speculate, but in this case, I can't imagine that the Department of Justice, facing increasing threats every year, violent crime, threats to our national security, drug trafficking threats,
Is that a no?
I don't know the answer, but I think it would be surprising if the department ever asked for less money. I think that would be not responsible.
You talked in a little bit in your testimony, General, about guns, and you've been very outspoken about the need for more gun control. With respect, and if you don't mind me asking, do you own a gun?
I don't.
Okay. Have you ever fired a gun?
Many times.
Okay. Do you have 24-hour security?
I do.
Okay. Let me ask you about fentanyl, because that's a huge problem, and I know you're worried about it, as are we. And we've, of course, got a problem with the precursor chemicals coming into Mexico to the Mexican cartels who manufacture the fentanyl and send it into the United States. Isn't a big part of the problem that if you took the Mexican drug cartels and turned them upside down and shook them, that President Lopez Obrador would fall out of their pockets?
Well, I'll leave the metaphor aside. The department has said that we do not have an investigation of the President of Mexico.
Do you think President of Mexico is our friend?
We need cooperation from Mexico. Mexico has been somewhat cooperative with respect to our fight against the cartels, not as helpful as I wish they were, but without their cooperation, we can't be successful in destroying the cartels.
Why wouldn't the president go to President Lopez Obrador and say, no offense, but the fentanyl problem is killing Americans. The illegal immigration problem is hurting Americans. If you don't cooperate with us, and he clearly hasn't been, and he's not afraid of us, we're going to implement tariffs on Mexico until you do.
I think there are many ways to encourage cooperation from another country.
But that would do it, wouldn't it?
I don't know whether that would do it or whether...
You don't think that would get his attention?
I am not a diplomat. I'm not a foreign affairs strategist. I know we need their support and cooperation.
Yeah.
I don't know whether that would be positive or negative.
So we just ask politely.
Well, we do more than that, but
Right.
considerably more than that.
let me ask-
I don't know the answer to your
Okay.
high-level
Let me ask you one
strategy
last question in my 14 seconds. I've been dying to ask you this question.
How long have you been dying to ask me this question?
Long time. Long time. Mr. Hunter Biden did not pay taxes on $1 million in 2014 and 2015. And he deducted payments from his income tax for personal expenses when he did file. For hookers, for a Lamborghini, for strip clubs, for sex clubs, for porn website memberships. Why did the Department of Justice let the statute of limitations run?
As you well know, Senator.
So you can't prosecute?
As you well know, Senator, that investigation is being conducted by Mr. Weiss, who was appointed by President Trump to be the U.S. Attorney in Delaware. Much of the investigation you're talking about occurred during the previous administration under Mr. Weiss. Mr. Weiss has continued his investigations. He's now a special counsel. He will issue a report which
So
will
are you saying
explain
it's
those...
Trump's fault?
Which will explain... No, I don't know whether there's fault or not. Mr. Weiss will explain this in his report.
But we can't. Mr. Hunter Biden walks free on not paying taxes on $1 million from 2014 and 15 because the Department of Justice let it happen, right?
Again, I'm not going to comment on decisions made in a pending investigation. In the end, Mr. Weiss will issue a report. I will provide the report to Congress. You will be able to question Mr. Weiss as to his reasoning, and he will be able to defend his reasoning.
Would you come with Mr. Weiss when he does that?
I'm not going to know the intricacies of Mr. Weiss' investigation. There would be no point. It's Mr. Weiss who's responsible for this investigation.
But you were head of the Department of Justice.
Yes, and I've appointed him as special counsel so that he can independently investigate this matter.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Senator Kennedy. Senator Manchin.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you, Judge, for being here. I appreciate your service.
Thank you, General.
Senator Heinrich.
Thank you, Chair. Attorney General, as you know, Vice Chair Collins and I worked very hard on a number of provisions in the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act with respect to both straw purchasing of firearms and then also gun trafficking offenses. Can you give us an update about how the department is using those new offenses and what progress you're making on that front?
Yes, I'd be happy to. So that act is really the most important gun legislation in decades, and has already had significant impact on our ability to prevent guns from falling in the hands of people who are prohibited by Congress from obtaining them because of their dangerousness. So as a consequence of the act, which extended the background checks for people under 21, we have been able to run 245,000 enhanced background checks, and we have denied 700 transactions which otherwise would have gone through, 700 people who should not have guns because Congress has so declared. And with respect to the straw purchasers provisions, we have charged more than 420 defendants now with illegal straw purchases under provisions of the BISCA and associated statutes we have on straw purchasing. So I'd say it's early days, but
Yep.
It's been very effective.
Yeah, we definitely want you to be able to use those authorities. What about the gun trafficking authority? Has that been helpful as well?
Yes, the gun trafficking allows us a separate crime and a separate penalty for trafficking guns where it's known that the guns are going to be used in crime, and those have also led to successful prosecutions.
I want to turn to fentanyl, and obviously that's something that's on everyone's mind on this panel. One of the things that I worked very hard on in the recent 24 CJS bill is language to create a comprehensive fentanyl tracking system. Can you tell us what you intend to do? I know we got that legislation done a little late, as Senator Moran reminded us, but we want you to be able to use those authorities and tell us about how you plan to put that together.
Well, so DEA will be using that to track the way in which fentanyl is prescribed and used, and that will be very important in our enforcement efforts.
Are you able to coordinate your efforts with DHS to help interdict fentanyl when it comes through land ports of entry before it gets to the U.S.?
So the FBI and DEA do have overseas intelligence which they're able to provide to DHS. I will say this also comes from our intelligence community writ large, and not simply the two agencies here. It is definitely the case that the more intelligence we can get and the more cooperation we can get from the Mexicans as to their information about fentanyl being moved to the border, the better DHS will be able to interdict it at the border.
How can Congress help you leverage better cooperation from both Mexico and China on this front?
Well, I'm not a diplomat, so on that phase, I'm not sure what Congress can do in this regard, but we are making every effort possible. The DEA administrator has spoken to her counterpart in China. The president, as you know, tried to re-up the cooperation that had been suspended with respect to drug trafficking. So at a law enforcement level, we are trying to enhance that. On the Mexico side, as I said, the president has directed members of the National Security Council staff to travel to Mexico. I've traveled, the Deputy Attorney General has traveled to try to enhance cooperation and get improvement in it.
We very much appreciate those efforts. I want to ask you about something related to treatment for folks who know they have addiction to fentanyl and other opioids. Yeah. Can you talk about what DOJ and DEA are doing to increase access to treatments like buprenorphine for patients in need? And this has been a particular challenge in New Mexico, where people want to get treatment, but they can't always get their prescription filled to get off of their fentanyl addiction. And I'm curious if you think it's necessary to remove medications like buprenorphine from the suspicious order reporting systems, because that seems to be the thing that is hanging up these prescriptions for people who are very much wanting to get treatment.
Well, to begin, this mostly comes from our grant programs, from the Office of Justice programs. We have the so-called CARA grants, which is the Comprehensive Addiction and Recovery Act. We're asking in this budget for $443 million, which is a $23 million increase. Those grants include our comprehensive opioid stimulant and substance abuse program, the so-called CASAP program, mental health and residential substance use treatment, the drug courts, the veteran treatments courts, prescription drug monitoring. We also have particularly youth-focused grants, seeking $47 million there for opioid-affected youth. I'm not exactly sure that I have the information with respect to Butte and how it's being treated in that respect, so I'll have to get back to you on whether...
Yeah, I look forward to following up with you on that, because I think we need to send a clear message to the pharmacies that they should stock the medications necessary for treatment. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Senator Heinrich. Senator Collins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Welcome, Mr. Attorney General. I very much appreciate it.
Here's an order of arrival, with the exception of Chair Murray and Vice Chair Collins, and ask that people keep their questioning to 5 minutes, except for the Chair and Vice Chair. And we will alternate between sides of the dais and sides of the aisle. So, Mr. Attorney General, we are now, as I said in my opening statement, painfully aware of the impacts of the Fiscal Responsibility Act and what that means. I cited the example of FBI in terms of the percentage cut, but what that actually means in terms of dollars. What will happen at the department, particularly to the law enforcement components, if it faces similar cuts in 2025?
Well, I obviously quite agree with you. Overall, as a consequence of FY 2024 budget, we anticipate needing to reduce a total of 4,813 positions. And that's not specifically about law enforcement, but I will move to that in a moment. The 2025 budget that we're requesting seeks to restore 1,409 positions. Specifically, with respect to law enforcement, between 23 and 24, we lost 200 agents in the positions in the FBI. Our request is an increase of 217 agents, which is, as you can see, is only 17 more agents than we had in FY 2023. For the U.S. Marshal Service, we lost 72 Deputy U.S. Marshals positions. We are asking now for an increase of 51, which includes what we need for purposes of the increased requirements for security for the justices. The U.S. attorneys between FY 23 and FY 24, which of course bring our criminal prosecutions, we lost 188 positions for assistant U.S. attorneys. We are asking for 50 over FY 24, which of course does not make up that number. I can go through the whole number if you'd like, each of you like, but you can see that we are, in most cases, we are not going to be able to make up even for what we lost between 23 and 24. But we are doing our best to be faithful to the congressional statute and to the bipartisan agreement.
Well, I appreciate that. I think as we know, the challenge is that there are very real impacts for these budget cuts, and they will have an effect on the public and on our ability to address all of the issues that the Justice Department is working on. Senator Moran and I both mentioned in our opening statements, as did you, the continuing fight against the opioid epidemic, substance misuse, the drug cartels. I continue to be very concerned about fentanyl use and poisoning. New Hampshire has lost too many people to fentanyl overdoses. Can you talk a little bit about DOJ's efforts to interdict these drugs and efforts to find a way to prosecute those responsible?
Yes, Senator. I have said, and I deeply mean this, that fentanyl is the deadliest drug threat that this country has ever faced. I've met with families at the DEA whose children, whose teenagers, whose infants, whose grandparents have died mostly not even knowing that what they're taking is fentanyl, thinking it's another kind of prescription pill that they were able to get over the internet. We don't even refer to this as overdoses anymore. We refer to this as drug poisoning, because that's what it is. So we are facing this with the urgency it requires. And we are trying to dismantle the entire network. So the network begins in China. It begins with the precursor companies that sell precursor chemicals that are necessary to make fentanyl through Mexico. So we have charged a number of those companies. We have indicted a number of their officials. We have even been able to snare some of them, the officials, when traveling outside of China. The Treasury Department has sanctioned those companies, so people cannot deal with them. Some of them are regular prescription drug companies, so sanctions are quite important. Then we move to Mexico and the importation of these precursors. I've traveled to Mexico myself 3 times, the Deputy Attorney General, I believe at least 3 times. Many other parts of our law enforcement apparatus have done the same to persuade them to cut off access to these precursors, to register them, and they have done some of what we've asked, not all, but that has been important. Then the chemicals are made into fentanyl in Mexico, primarily in laboratories. We have, again, on my visits, we have urged the Mexican government, and particularly the Mexican military, the Army, and the Marines who are responsible, have taken over this task to destroy those labs, and they have done some, but not as much as we would like. We have indicted the principal cartel leaders, including the sons of El Chapo, the so-called Chapitos of the Sinaloa cartel, as well as leaders of the Jalisco New Generation cartel. Those 2 are the principal drivers of fentanyl trafficking in the United States. On one of my travels, I urged the Mexican government and the Attorney General to approve the extradition, and in fact, they did approve the extradition of Ovidio Guzman Lopez, who was the lead Chapito. Then
Mr. Attorney General, I know you could probably go on, which is very helpful. We would like to talk all day about what's being done to address this. I'm out of time, but I also have one very brief follow-up, and that is, you mentioned going after the precursors in China.
Yes.
Are you seeing any difference at all since President Biden and Xi signed their agreement around dealing with those drugs back last fall? Has there been any change in the way China is reacting?
Yeah, we've seen some, but nothing like what we want or expect. The president says the words are nice, but we need to verify, and at this point, we don't have very much verification.
Thank you. Senator Moran.
Chairman Sheen, thank you. Let me visit with you for a moment, Attorney General, about...
Nice to see you again. Thank you for being here. Your current budget, by my calculations, is $48.3 billion. Is that right?
The budget request is for $37.8 billion, the FY25 budget, and that would constitute a 3.5% increase over.
But with mandatory spending, your budget's 48.3. Is that right?
I don't have the number for including mandatory, but I'll certainly be able to get back to you for that.
Well, let's take out mandatory.
Yeah.
Your discretionary budget right now is $37.8 billion.
The FY25 request is for 37.8.
That's not what I'm asking.
I'm sorry?
What's your current budget?
Well, it's 3.5% less than that, so I can take out my calculator and do the math, but I don't have it in front of me.
All right, well, let me put it another way. You're asking for an extra $467 million, is that right?
In the increased amount of money that we're asking for, that's approximately right, yes.
Okay. To your knowledge, in the past, let's say 40 years, has the Department of Justice ever come before Congress and said, we don't need any more, we're going to make it with what we've got in light of the fiscal circumstances in the country?
I normally wouldn't want to speculate, but in this case, I can't imagine that the Department of Justice, facing increasing threats every year, violent crime, threats to our national security, drug trafficking threats, would...
Is that a no?
I don't know the answer, but I think it would be surprising if the department ever asked for less money. I think that would be not responsible.
You talked in a little bit in your testimony, General, about guns, and you've been very outspoken about the need for more gun control. With respect, and if you don't mind me asking, do you own a gun?
I don't.
Okay. Have you ever fired a gun?
Many times.
Okay. Do you have 24-hour security?
I do.
Okay. Let me ask you about fentanyl, because that's a huge problem, and I know you're worried about it, as are we. And we've, of course, got a problem with the precursor chemicals coming into Mexico to the Mexican cartels who manufacture the fentanyl and send it into the United States. Isn't a big part of the problem that if you took the Mexican drug cartels and turned them upside down and shook them, that President Lopez Obrador would fall out of their pockets?
Well, I'll leave the metaphor aside. The department has said that we do not have an investigation of the President of Mexico.
Do you think President of Mexico is our friend?
We need cooperation from Mexico. Mexico has been somewhat cooperative with respect to our fight against the cartels, not as helpful as I wish they were, but without their cooperation, we can't be successful in destroying the cartels.
Why wouldn't the president go to President Lopez Obrador and say, no offense, but the fentanyl problem is killing Americans, the illegal immigration problem is hurting Americans. If you don't cooperate with us, and he clearly hasn't been, and he's not afraid of us, we're going to implement tariffs on Mexico until you do.
I think there are many ways to encourage cooperation from another country.
But that would do it, wouldn't it?
I don't know whether that would do it or whether...
You don't think that would get his attention?
I am not a diplomat. I'm not a foreign affairs strategist. I know we need their support and cooperation.
Yeah.
I don't know whether that would be positive or negative.
So we just ask politely.
Well, we do more than that, but considerably more than that. I don't know the answer to your high-level...
Let me ask you one last question in my 14 seconds. I've been dying to ask you this question.
How long have you been dying to ask me this question?
Long time. Long time.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Attorney General, welcome. Good to see you again. Thank you for the trip last summer where you had an opportunity to kind of get a little summary on the ground of some of the law enforcement, public safety issues that we face primarily in rural Alaska. I appreciated that Chair Murray had highlighted murdered, missing Indigenous persons. The work that your teams are doing, working with us in Alaska, is very, very important. Also appreciate the keen focus here in this committee and the subcommittee on fentanyl. I wish that I could say we're far enough away that we have escaped, but our smallest of the small rural villages are being targeted because you can sell this poison there for 10 times more in a village like Quinnahock or Togiak than you can in even Anchorage. So we all need to keep leaning in on that. Back to the issue of tribal justice. When you were there, we had good conversations. I think that was very important. We've seen some measurable progress on cross-deputization agreements between the state of Alaska and tribes relating to law enforcement. We've got the Not Invisible Commission report recommendations that are giving us a little bit of a template here. But I am a little concerned in terms of the follow-on from your visits insofar as what more we can do to address the public safety issues. We've asked for some updates. We haven't gotten a lot, and I don't want to be in a situation where these villages, whether it's Galena or Huslia or really any place, feel that you came, you saw, and then there hasn't been the follow-on. We've got a lot of work I think we know that we need to do to implement VAWA 2022 and the Alaska Public Safety Pilot. So I would ask that you and your team can provide us with recommendations for improving the funding opportunities for our Alaska Native communities in the short term here. If we can do this within the next 30 days, that would be great if you have legislative proposals. But we want to keep the momentum going. I know that you committed to me. Your teams are working on that. But if there are legislative proposals, again, we want to try to put some of these in the pipeline.
Well, we're very happy to do that. I will say that it was a real eye-opening experience for me, as you told me it would be, to be on the ground there and to see the difficulty of transportation between one village and another, and the difficulty law enforcement has of reaching a village, and the really inexcusable fact that there really isn't sufficient law enforcement in any of the villages. I can give just one update. I would say as a result of my visit, I've been pressing for money for special tribal jurisdiction. And this budget request includes a plus $14 million from FY24 for special tribal criminal jurisdiction. And I would say it's a consequence of what I saw in Alaska.
Well, let's commit to working through some of these specifics going forward. One of the other things that I have heard is as our tribes are looking for federal financial assistance, not only in the public safety space but in others, they have been directed to entities for technical assistance, but it's technical assistance that is from the lower 48. Perhaps maybe not culturally responsive or geographically relevant to many of the issues that we experience there. So, you know, I appreciate what the department is doing to try to help bolster the capacity of tribes and tribal organizations as they're looking to gain access to some of these grant opportunities. But it's something that I'd like your folks to look at, because this again is a big challenge. If you're talking to somebody who has no idea that we don't have, for instance, reservations in Alaska, and the construct of the governance just makes it that much more challenging. So I raise that to you. I want to comment very quickly on what Chair Murray had raised about the Crime Victims Fund. You outlined the benefits of it, but I will tell you I am very, very concerned that we're going to be in a situation where if additional fines, fees, penalties from other sources aren't redirected to address the shortfalls, so many of these organizations that just are working so hard, they're burning out, they can't deal with this year-to-year challenge because they simply don't have the resources. And it's not only in the Crime Victims Fund, it's the impact that we're seeing with our child advocacy centers. Many of our COCs have been using additional funding for their base operational costs in addition to VOCA cuts. So you've got VOCA funds that are being cut, you've got the CACs that are hanging out there. It is really a tenuous situation. I know you know that, but we really need to have identified some kind of an offset for this $7.3 billion that's proposed to replenish the crime.
Now, there is a proposal. If I have time to respond now, I will. I totally agree with you. This trying to depend on the amount of money we're able to get in any particular year is always going to be uncertain. The administration's proposal in the budget, I don't think there's legislative text yet, would take effect in 2026, provide $7.3 billion in mandatory appropriations over 5 years to replenish and stabilize the fund. I think that's better than the way we're doing it now, year to year. And so our staff would be happy to speak with the staff of the subcommittee and your own staff as well on this proposal.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Murkowski. I understand, General Garland, that you're okay to keep going.
Sure.
We don't need a break, so let me ask Senator Peters to go next.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. Attorney General Garland, thank you for continuing to plow through, and certainly it's good to see you here today with us. Following the October 7 attacks and the conflict between Israel and Hamas, and as that continues, we're seeing significant increase in anti-Semitism, anti-Muslim, and anti-Arab hate. And I certainly worry a great deal, as I know you do, about the increase in hate against these communities all across the United States, including schools. We're seeing it on college campuses. I've heard from Muslim and Jewish constituents who are worried for the safety for their families and their houses of worship. According to recent reports, the rates of anti-Semitism and anti-Muslim hate have hit historic highs in our country. And Attorney General Garland, I know you have said repeatedly that the Justice Department has absolutely no tolerance for violence or unlawful threats of violence fueled by anti-Semitism or Islamophobia, and that no person and no community in this country should have to live in fear of hate-related violence. So my question for you is, given this profoundly concerning trend, can you speak to how the department utilizes your existing resources, whether via Civil Rights Division or elsewhere, to support these communities that are being impacted? And in what ways does the department need additional support to respond, given the large increase of this type of violence around the country?
Yes. I couldn't have said it better than you did with respect to the level of our concern. Since the Hamas attacks on October 7th, spiking hate crimes, both against, with respect to Islamophobia and with respect to anti-Semitism, just gone through the roof. We have brought quite a number of prosecutions even during that time, since October 7th, and we treat this in the most serious way. We have to disrupt and deter such acts, and the only way in the end to do that is to get heavy sentences. With respect to our work in this, this is a combination of the work from our Civil Rights Division side and from our where it becomes domestic violent extremism to our national security side. We've asked for $201.3 million, which is a 10.8% increase for the Civil Rights Division, 14 attorneys, much of that to cover hate crime investigations, which are spiking. The FBI Civil Rights section has asked for $114.5 million, which is an increase in 30% for that purpose. In the U.S. Attorney's offices, we've asked for $55.8 million, an increase of 12.2%. For the civil rights coordinators to work on these kind of matters. An important but little known part of the department is our Community Relations Service, which tries to mediate conflicts so that they don't get to the stage that we're talking about here. And for them, we're asking for $29.1 million, which is a 21.2% increase. That's on the civil rights side. We have another whole set of requests on the national security side, where this moves from hate crimes to what we would regard as domestic terrorism.
All right, well, good, and it's important to keep that focus, and I appreciate your focus on that and your request. In 2018, I led the successful bipartisan effort to authorize a new grant program titled the Emergency and Transitional Pet Shelter and Housing Assistance Grant Program. This program was set up as a pass-through, which funds initially going to the USDA, but the grants are administered by the Department of Justice, and it provides emergency and transition shelter options for domestic violence survivors with companion animals. And this is actually very critical, given that studies have shown that victims of abuse are less likely to leave a very abusive situation if they have a beloved pet. Abusers often target that pet. And in fact, a number of studies have shown that on average, the person who is being abused, the survivor, will delay leaving a relationship for up to 2 years. 2 years being in that, because clearly they care about this pet who's going to be the target of further abuse. So this vital program helps the federal government ensure that more domestic violence shelters can accommodate victims with pets, or they arrange a third party to make sure that the victim knows that that pet will be secure. And in the years since its launch, we have seen demand far outstretch the available funding. And in fiscal year 24, I secured authorized funding of $3 million for the program. So my question for you, Attorney General Garland, do you agree that it's essential that we continue funding a grant program authorized by my PAWS Act and help empower victims of domestic violence with the tools they need to escape the violent situations that they're in?
We have to protect the victims of domestic violence, and thanks to the PAWS Act, over the last 3 years, our Office of Victims of Crime has made 31 awards totaling $8.8 million for the nonprofit entities that support domestic violence survivors and their pets as they navigate into transitional housing.
Great. Well, I appreciate your support of the program and your statement on the necessity of doing this to help our survivors. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Peters. Senator Moran.
Chairwoman, thank you again. General, let me raise three.
Moran.
Chairman Sheen, thank you. Let me visit with you for a moment, Attorney General, about AI and our national security risks. Both Congress and the Department of Justice are grappling with the opportunities and threats that are presented by the rapid development of artificial intelligence. 2 months ago, the department appointed its first chief AI officer. Yesterday, my colleagues and I, we were in a letter trying to bring the risks of AI to the attention of other colleagues of ours. We specifically are targeting the potential catastrophic risks associated with the use of AI in the development of biological, chemical, cyber, and nuclear weapons. I'm looking for assurance that the department is and will pay sufficient attention to these extraordinary threats to our national security. And I would welcome your thoughts about what's happening in the new AI office, as well as other DOJ components with national security responsibilities. What's happening to consider and mitigate the national security risks and other catastrophic risks created by AI?
Yes, so AI has both promise and incredible peril for us. As is often the case in the beginning, offense beats defense here. And we are very concerned about the way AI can be used for everything from mimicking normal conversations in text, and therefore advancing the ability to do phishing expeditions by getting passwords from people, by using their social media to appear as if they are a friend, and likewise just plain hacking and constantly and repetitive hacking in a way that clicking on the keyboard will seem very 20th century. So we are extremely concerned about that. AI has some possibilities also for defense. Instead of having to defend constantly with human actors, someday we hope to be able to develop an AI defense to the cyber attacks that you're talking about. This does require us to enhance our AI capabilities. That's why I recruited the AI head that you're talking about. He's a PhD in computer science who teaches computer science at Princeton, got his PhD in Stanford. We are looking to hire as many people with those kind of qualifications as are possible. And that's why we're asking for the money that we're asking for specifically with respect to cyber. We're asking in this budget for $894.6 million, which is an 11.9% increase in our cyber crime combat, and a $432.9 million increase specifically with respect to cybersecurity, which is 15.6% increase.
Thank you for highlighting those. Let me turn to a different topic. Last week I was disturbed to see an NBC News report that an individual on the terrorist watch list had been detained by the Border Patrol on the southern border and then promptly released. The facts of this case are complex, they're nuanced, but according to the report, when the detainee appeared before the immigration judge, the DHS attorneys did not inform the judge of the potential terrorist ties, despite having received that warning from the FBI. The judge ultimately ordered the detainee to be released. I don't expect you to be able to respond to the actions of the Department of Homeland Security, but again, I would look for assurances that through the FBI, the Terrorist Screening Center, the immigration courts are taking the necessary steps to ensure suspected terrorists are not simply released into the country. You talked about the increasing terrorist threat to our country. My last trip to the border, there were nationals, Chinese nationals, who were apprehended in my presence. I see this as a significant threat, and I just want really to highlight this issue to the FBI and to the Department of Justice, making sure that you're doing your job.
Yes, the FBI's job, and they take it extremely seriously, is when they learn information about somebody who has been able to pass through the border, to follow that person, to deter that person, to disrupt that person, and to arrest that person where we can. In the example that you're talking about, that person has since been detained. And we are constantly in discussions with the Department of Homeland Security about how to improve the processes between Homeland Security and the immigration courts and at the border with respect to terrorist screening.
Thank you, General.
Senator Heinrich. Leaders, Senator Moran.
Chairwoman, thank you again. General, let me raise three things in pretty, I hope, short order. We've talked, I think, since the beginning of my time at CJS and your arrival as Attorney General about my desire to focus law enforcement grants. There's lots of opportunities for local law enforcement to compete for grants to support local law enforcement, but we've highlighted numerous times to you and to your predecessor about the challenges that small law enforcement agencies in small communities have. They don't have a grant writer. It takes a police officer off the street or a sheriff's officer off the roadway to apply for grants. And we have encouraged the department to create a separate grant program specifically for small communities. I just would like to ask you if you, I doubt that you have with you, but would you see if there's any statistics that indicate how we're faring in getting small law enforcement agencies across the country additional resources as compared to others or compared to the past?
Yeah, I'll be happy to go back and ask how those statistics compare. Problem you pointed out has been pointed out to me by local sheriffs, by local police departments in small rural areas. It is a problem because they don't have grant writers. They don't have they may not even know about the availability. So we have our Office of Justice Programs and our COPS office have gone to great lengths to try to simplify the applications, to reach out to rural law enforcement about the possibility of getting grants and helping and assisting in the applications. But I don't know the statistics, and I will get back to you.
We'd like to see if it's working. I had suggested, and I don't know whether the suggestion, and this predates you at the department, but that there be created a separate grant application and program for those small agencies. Let me also highlight anti-Semitism and hate crimes. And you have focused your attention on this issue, and I appreciate that. But according to data tabulated by the Anti-Defamation League, there were 5,204 incidents between October 7th and the end of 2023. That's a number that is greater than the entire total of those instances in 2022. I commend you for your recognition of this issue and efforts. And is there things that you would point to, specific proposals in the department's budget request that would be evidence of attention to anti-Semitism and hate crimes?
Well, you're absolutely right about that. I spoke at the Anti-Defamation League conference earlier this year and recited the statistics that the FBI has, which are very much consistent with the statistics that ADL itself is reporting. The parts of our budget that are relevant here and are most important are the increases for the Civil Rights Division, which has particular jurisdiction over hate crime prosecutions, the FBI's Civil Rights Section, which supports those prosecutions, and our National Security Division and U.S. Attorney's offices that bring these cases. U.S. Attorney's offices bring the hate crime cases, but then also bring, along with the National Security Division, where hate crimes progress even further across the board into domestic terrorism.
Finally, General, I would mention an occurrence in Kansas. The United States Penitentiary in Leavenworth went into lockdown and then modified its operations beginning March the 1st, now more than a month ago. There are security situations in the BOP facility, I know, that can require certain actions to protect the safety of inmates as well as the staff. But these status changes are inherently disruptive. And of course, we need to remember that inmates are entitled to civil rights and that the BOP staff are entitled to a functioning environment. My understanding is this issue, this circumstance, is close to being resolved if it hasn't already been today. But I wanted to make sure it was a priority for you and the department.
Yes, I'm not specifically familiar with the situation in Leavenworth, but I will ask my staff to get back to yours today.
Thank you. I just really wanted to bring it to your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Moran. Senator Reed.
Welcome, General. Last summer of an account. In essence, the original language meant that serious criminals could be tipped off that they are under investigation. That includes fentanyl distributors, gun runners, mob bosses, etc. Fortunately, through a bipartisan committee process, we worked to address major flaws in Section 10 and curb its negative effects. Do you agree that such a policy would handcuff law enforcement and the intelligence community if the bank had to disclose that their account has been terminated by law enforcement?
I have to say I'm not familiar with the provisions of, I know what the act is and the proposal. I'm not familiar with the requirements in general. As a theoretical matter, without commenting on that, obviously, if we are investigating someone and that person is advised of our investigation, that makes our investigation all the more difficult and may compromise it. But I can't answer specifically with respect to the statute.
Let me prepare a letter, send it to your office so that you and your staff can review it and then respond. I know when you come up here, it's sort of a range of issues from all the way across the board, so I completely understand that. A quick other question, and again, this might not, I think you would be familiar with this. The reauthorization of FISA, there was a great debate in the House about a warrant requirement. Would you support a warrant requirement for U.S. persons in 702?
So 702 is absolutely essential to our ability to protect the country from everything from nation states to foreign terrorist-inspired attacks in the United States. I don't support a warrant requirement. We are talking about information that has already been lawfully collected pursuant to a court order because the target is a foreign individual operating abroad where foreign intelligence information is likely. And courts have never required us to search lawfully collected holdings with a warrant. So I don't think it's constitutionally required. I am concerned about errors in the query system that occurred when I first came in. These were reported to me, and I directed the Deputy Attorney General and the FBI Director to put in quite a number of fixes in to prevent that problem, and the consequence has been a really large decrease in the number of queries that are made in excess of 90%, and a compliance rate in the area of 98%. The problem with a warrant is that a warrant requires probable cause of something, and we don't have probable cause at the stage of the query. Query is intended to find out what's in our holdings so we can determine whether we have probable cause. If you impose a warrant requirement with the probable cause requirement, it effectively makes queries impossible to go forward. So it would just eliminate our ability to use 702 to find out what information we have with respect to foreign terrorism, with respect to cyber attacks, with respect to foreign intelligence collection by our adversaries.
Mr. Secretary, as you, excuse me, Attorney General, as you understand, there is a immediate requirement to renew FISA because it lapses.
Yes.
Are you comfortable with the House version of the legislation?
Not knowing exactly what the House version is, I'm comfortable with the provisions that provide for the fixes that we have administratively put into place, and that do not require, though, a warrant requirement.
Thank you very much.
Doc, the medications necessary for treatment. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Senator Heinrich. Senator Collins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Welcome, Mr. Attorney General. I very much appreciated hearing the update on the effectiveness of the straw purchasing and gun trafficking provisions that Senator Heinrich and I authored, and so I won't have to ask you about that issue. I do want to turn to a very serious and confounding problem that the state of Maine is experiencing, particularly in our rural communities. Chinese nationals are establishing and operating illegal marijuana growing operations. I first raised concerns about this problem in June of 2022. Thanks to the work of some enterprising Maine journalists, we now know that there are more than 200 such operations operating in houses across our state. And by the way, those houses are forever ruined by the operations, and that contributes to our housing shortage as well. Last month, I asked the FBI director about this matter during his open testimony before the Senate Intelligence Committee. While the director cited the FBI's efforts to support task force and secure indictments, he was unable to answer a fundamental, troubling question, and that is, why is China sending its citizens, sneaking them into the country to open illegal marijuana operations in rural Maine communities? Just recently, 3 Chinese nationals were apprehended as they crossed the border illegally in northern Maine. Now, we've had a tremendous effort by state, county, and local law enforcement to identify and start shutting down these illegal operations. But there are very clear federal interests here, particularly with respect to national security. 2 days ago, your Office of Legislative Affairs finally responded to 4 inquiries that I had sent to the department on this topic. But unfortunately, the response letter provided almost no substantive information on whether the department is making this a priority, working with state, local, and county law enforcement, and exploring the national security implications. And I do recognize there's a limit to what you can say in a letter of that sort. But General Garland, what are the Criminal Division, the National Security Division, and the U.S. Attorney's Office in Maine doing to address these illegal growing operations? And in particular, what are they doing to support the tremendous but under-resourced effort at the state, county, and local level?
Senator, you've raised a serious problem. It's not only a Maine problem. So DEA is reporting that There are transnational criminal organizations in some 20 states that are, it's not so much grow houses, but illegal marijuana grows. I know specifically with respect to Maine that DEA and the FBI are working with the IRS and the Department of Homeland Security as well as local law enforcement to investigate those illegal grows. I also know that the U.S. Attorney in Maine has made this a priority for her office. In most cases, I recommend talking to the Office of Legislative Affairs, but I know you are very well synced up with the U.S. Attorney's office there, and they obviously have more very specific Maine information, but I don't think anybody could take this more seriously than our U.S. Attorney there. And she is able to harness the resources of all of our agencies, not only our own, but also Department of Homeland Security and IRS.
Do you have a theory on why the Chinese are sending people illegally into our country to establish these grow operations? As you point out, it's not just Maine. I believe Oklahoma, for example, has had a problem as well.
I don't have a theory now. Normally I develop a theory by learning the facts from the different investigative entities that look into this. So at this point I don't have a theory. There are a lot of obvious theories, including profit motive, and these transnational criminal organizations are operating. The reason we call them transnational is they're operating all over the world to make money where they can. But I can't tell you what the specific motivation here is.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Collins. Chair Murray.
I just wanted to put something on your radar screen that struck me when I listened to Senator Moran's question about Leavenworth. We wrote a letter to you, a bipartisan letter, Senator Manchin and I. We have quite a few employees at the Hazelden prison that has over 3,000 inmates. A whistleblower came forward with pretty graphic details of mismanagement, abuse, and worse. And it's a chronic problem there because I think lack of workforce and lack of ability to staff up properly. I don't know if you have any reaction to what's going on at Hazelden specifically, or do I need to follow up with you?
We'll follow up, but this has come to our attention, obviously, not only from your letter, and I believe the actions were taken over the last couple of weeks, but we'll get more information to you. I think you're right on the problem of recruitment. It's a difficult, it's not only Hazelton where it's difficult for us to recruit correctional officers. It's a very dangerous job in facilities that have, there's not been the capital investment over the last decades that's required. And sometimes state and local facilities not too far away are offering more money in terms of salary. So we have asked for money for retention and hiring more than the normal salary that we would otherwise be able to pay. That's what the director thinks is going to be necessary to recruit the number of officers necessary to provide safety in our prisons.
Right. I think safety is the issue. Obviously, it has been at that facility. I know you've answered a lot of questions on fentanyl, but this is a huge issue for West Virginia. We have the most really drug-related deaths per capita than any other state, and most of it's tied to fentanyl. Do you think that the $2.7 billion is an adequate budget for the DEA, and how could our resources be better prioritized to reduce and one day eliminate the amount of deaths we experience from fentanyl? Obviously, to stop the flow of fentanyl would be number one, but how would you respond to that?
We would always like more money. But we're obviously trying to live within the caps that were agreed to. I think the budget that we've asked for is a 6% increase over the enacted for 24. It includes a addition of 40 agents, which will be very helpful. This also includes money for diversion control, which was part of the problem in quite a number of states with respect to opioids. And then there's the money that we have available in grants with respect to, for state and local opioid addiction treatment and protection. So that's the more than $490 million in counter drug-related OJP grants, including the CARA grants and the COSOP grants.
You know, we took a trip to Mexico, met with the president of Mexico. Senator Moran was on that trip just briefly. And he was on the trip the whole time. It was a brief trip. Anyway, we sat in and listened to the president of Mexico basically tell us that you have a demand problem in the United States, and you've heard him say this publicly, and that because we were imploring him to stop the flow of the chemicals that are coming in from China and then having the development and production in Mexico and then flowing into the United States. What is the current state of that disruptive, or that needed disruption between the Mexican border and the United States in terms of getting the Mexican government to cooperate with our government law enforcement to be able to shut these things down?
Senator, I've sat through that same discussion 3 times by the president of Mexico, so I'm familiar with your frustration. I would say cooperation is improving, but much, much more is required. They have increased the number of precursor chemicals on the list that have to be registered to come in. They have, at our request, extradited a number of the people who we've indicted, the heads of the Sinaloa cartel, the Chapitos, the sons of El Chapo. They have destroyed labs, and I will say, in connection, for example, with their arrest of Ovidio, the son of El Chapo, a number of their Mexican Marines lost their lives. They are facing an organization which, in many ways, has more heavy weaponry than some small countries. So it's dangerous for them, but it is not sufficient. And that's why I keep going. That's why my Deputy Attorney General keeps going. And that's why our law enforcement agencies at all the operational level keep going to try to get more cooperation.
Thank you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Senator Capito. Senator Britt.
Excellent. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Mr. General, thank you for being here today. Really appreciate it. During last year's hearing, I asked you about training materials that were used to prepare the U.S. Marshals assigned to protective details at the homes of our Supreme Court justices in the aftermath of the leaked Dobbs decision. Those training materials made it clear that far from having the full
Boston field office, in which he explains that conspiracies about the FBI causing the Capitol insurrection are false and concerning.
Without objection.
And finally, I ask unanimous consent to enter an excerpt from FBI Director Wray's testimony before this committee last July, where he states, quote, "I will say this notion that somehow the violence at the Capitol on January 6th was part of some operation orchestrated by FBI sources and agents is ludicrous, and it's a disservice to our brave, hardworking, dedicated men and women." Close quote.
Without objection. The gentleman from Florida is recognized for 5 minutes.
Attorney General, you've told us that it's a dangerous conspiracy theory to allege that the Department of Justice is communicating with these state and local prosecutions against Trump. You can clear it all up for us right now. Will the Department of Justice provide to the committee all documents, all correspondence between the department and Alvin Bragg's office and Fonnie Willis's office and Letitia James's office?
The offices you're referring to are independent offices of state.
I get that. I get that. The question is whether or not you will provide all of your documents and correspondence. That's the question. I don't need a history lesson.
Well, I'm going to say again, we do not control those offices. They make their own decisions.
The question is whether you communicate with them, not whether you control them. Do you communicate with them, and will you provide those communications?
If you make a request, we'll refer it to our Office of Legislative Affairs.
But see, here's the thing. You come in here and you lodge this attack that it's a conspiracy theory, that there is coordinated lawfare against Trump. And then when we say, fine, just give us the documents, give us the correspondence, and then if it's a conspiracy theory, that will be evident. But when you say, well, we'll take your request, and then we'll sort of work it through the DOJ's accommodation process, then you're actually advancing the very dangerous conspiracy theory that you're concerned about. Now, you were a judge, once nominated the highest court in our country. When you were a judge, I'm just curious, did you ever make political donations to partisan candidates?
No.
No, and you didn't because that would create the potential appearance of impropriety.
I didn't because there's a federal rule barring federal judges from making contributions.
Right, but under that same theory of attacks on the judicial process, like, shouldn't someone be owed like a jury of their peers and a judge that's non-biased rather than getting a judge from your political opponent's donor file?
I'm well aware that you're not asking a hypothetical. You're asking me to comment on a jury verdict in another jurisdiction which has to be respected. I won't comment on it. That case is still ongoing. The defendant
Mr. Attorney General, I hadn't asked you about the verdict yet. We were getting there. I was talking about the judge. And so let me ask you this question about your time as a judge. Was there ever a time when you were a judge when you had a family member who was personally profiting off of the notoriety of a case that was before your court?
I'm going to say again, it's very clear you're asking me to comment on a case in another jurisdiction.
No, wait, hold on, Mr. Attorney General. Did you ever have a family member profit off of the notoriety of any case that you sat over?
Say again, you're asking
yes or no?
You're asking me to comment on a case currently.
Well, it seems you're connecting the dots,
court.
Mr. Attorney General. I'm just asking you as to a general principle, but you are aware that Judge Merchan's daughter was profiting off of this prosecution. You are aware that that creates the appearance of impropriety. You know the very reason there's a federal rule against judges giving donations is because it is the very attack on the judicial process that we're concerned about.
I'm sorry, I don't agree with anything you just said, but I'm not going to comment on it.
Okay, so you won't comment on it, Mr. Attorney General, but you had no problem dispatching Matthew Colangelo. Who's Matthew Colangelo?
That is false. I did not dispatch Matthew Colangelo.
Matthew
That's
Colangelo,
false.
Matthew
False.
Colangelo became the Assistant Attorney General at the very beginning of the Biden administration. Without having been Senate confirmed, goes and gets this senior role at the DOJ, and then after, I believe it's Gupta replaces Colangelo, Colangelo makes this remarkable downstream career journey from the U.S. Department of Justice in Washington, D.C., and then pops up in Alvin Bragg's office to go get Trump. And you're saying that's just a career choice that was made that has nothing to do with the lawfare coordinated by the
I'm saying it's false. I did not dispatch Mr. Colangelo anywhere.
Well, do you know how he ended up there?
I assume he he applied for a job there and got the job.
But see, you know what?
I can tell you I had nothing to do with it.
Well, you might not have had anything to do with it, but we've got this contemporaneous evidence in Mr. Pomerantz's book. So Pomerantz writes this book, which I'm sure you're aware of, where he says, we put together the legal eagles to get Trump. We got all these folks together, and we assembled them for that purpose. And so when we on the Judiciary Committee think about attacks on the judicial process, our concern is that the facts and the law aren't being followed. A target is acquired, here, Trump, and then you assemble the legal talent from DOJ, Mr. Pomerantz, and you bring everybody in to get him. And meanwhile, the judge is making money on it. The judge is making money on it, or the judge's family is making money on it for stuff that you yourself wouldn't do. You know, no one's going to buy this. No one's going to believe it. It's going to create great disruption. And I am saddened by it because, like you, I have given my life to the law. I care deeply about the law, and I think that the lawfare we've seen against President Trump will do great damage well beyond our time in public service. I see my time's expired. I yield back.
Ranking members recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Attorney General, do you want to respond to anything in Mr. Gates' tirade?
I think everything he was talking about was a case in another jurisdiction, an independent prosecutor. Mr. Pomerantz worked for that independent prosecutor. I don't know Mr. Pomerantz. I don't know what's in his book, but these are decisions made in another office independent of the Justice Department.
Thank you, Mr. Attorney General. Last week, as we all know, a jury of his peers convicted former President Trump on 34 felony counts of falsifying business records of the first degree. The case was brought by the Manhattan DA, so it is a state case, not a federal case. I shouldn't have to ask you this, Mr. Attorney General, but since the majority seems to be confused, can you please explain the difference between a state case and a federal case?
Yes, the Manhattan District Attorney has jurisdiction over cases involving New York state law, completely independent of the Justice Department, which has jurisdiction over cases involving federal law. We do not control the Manhattan District Attorney. Manhattan District Attorney does not report to us. The Manhattan District Attorney makes its own decisions about cases that he wants to bring under his state law.
Thank you. My Republican colleagues seem to believe.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from California.
Mr. Attorney General, we appreciate your being here. We appreciate how you have led this department with integrity and discipline and your enormous public service. I appreciate your willingness to sit through this endless cascade of false allegations and conspiracy theories and innuendo. The chairman began this hearing with the dramatic statement that justice is no longer blind. By that, he means that justice is no longer objective or impartial, that it is suddenly now a respecter of persons in the wrong way. That is, it will distinguish between people based on their position. But of course, the chairman's real problem is that justice remains no respecter of persons. That you can be the former president of the United States, but if you commit crimes, you'll be held responsible. That's his problem. That's the problem of all my Republican colleagues right now, and that is they're about to nominate a convicted felon. And they don't know how to cope with that. They don't know how to cope with the justice system that, in fact, treats Donald Trump the same as it would any other citizen. And so they have to push these conspiracy theories that they know are patently false. And they try to run over you with questions they won't let you answer, because their whole arguments are utterly insupportable and destructive of our justice system. They care more about this convicted felon than they do the country. I have to say I'm pleased and a bit surprised to see that the flag in this committee is still flying right side up, because they want to turn it upside down, even as they want to turn our justice system upside down. Let me address the conspiracy theory of the day, which is somehow President Biden, through your department, has convicted Donald Trump in Manhattan in an effort to weaponize justice against the former president. So let me just ask some basic questions about this phony conspiracy theory. Did you appoint Alvin Bragg to be Manhattan DA?
No.
Of course not. He's elected. Did you select the jury in that case?
The judge selected the jury.
Well, did you select the judge in that case?
No.
No, of course not. The judge was randomly selected. Did you select the jury in that case?
No.
The jury was actually selected by Donald Trump and his attorneys. Did you reach a verdict in that case?
No.
Did you instruct the jury in that case?
No.
Did you tell the prosecutor what charges to bring in that case?
No.
This was 12 ordinary New Yorkers who weighed the evidence and found Donald Trump guilty of 34 felonies. And instead of celebrating the fact that in this country, an ordinary group of jurors, an ordinary group of 12 people can still adjudicate a case involving one of the most powerful people in the country, no, they would denigrate the whole system. They would tear it down. In the service of this convicted felon, they would tear everything down. They would tear the house of this democracy down around them. They say it's unprecedented to bring charges against a former president. You're damn right it's unprecedented. We've never had a president of the United States who was making hush money payments to a porn star and then falsifying business records to cover it up. Yeah, that's unprecedented. We've never had a president withhold classified information and then obstruct the investigation. That is unprecedented. We've never had a president incite a violent attack on the Capitol. That is unprecedented. And you know what else is unprecedented? The fact that so many leaders of that party are perfectly fine with all of that. In their headlong pursuit of power, they're perfectly fine with that. They're going to nominate a convicted felon as their presidential candidate. And they have another conspiracy theory, which is when a search was executed of the president's residence in Mar-a-Lago, they went in, as the president said, locked and loaded and ready to take him out. Yet another dangerous falsehood. And your dedicated public servants of the Justice Department are having their lives threatened because of the irresponsible actions of people on this committee and in the Senate and elsewhere who would endanger the lives of those committed to enforcing law and order, even as they claim to be a party of law and order. Mr. Attorney General, I am grateful for your service, for your withstanding all of this. We will get through this because of people like you and the honorable public servants at the Justice Department. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Arizona.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Attorney General,
are not taken into consideration. But the principal bulwark of the rule of law is the career workforce of the department, the agents and the prosecutors who do their jobs every day with only one purpose, to do the right thing in every case.
Thank you, Attorney General. I want to talk briefly about antitrust, because this is an area where, under your leadership and the leadership of Assistant Attorney General Jonathan Cantor, historically a bipartisan issue, by the way, the DOJ Antitrust Division has won victories in court against employers that sought to suppress workers' pay and blocked harmful mergers in the airline industry. You're working to lower food prices by targeting anti-competitive practices and mergers in the grocery and meat processing industry. And the Antitrust Division successfully ended a price-fixing scheme in DVD and Blu-ray sales and prevented video game companies from suppressing wages in esports. These are incredible accomplishments, and you're also working to promote competition in the live music industry. Thank you for the recently filed case against Live Nation Ticketmaster. Proud that Washington's Attorney General has joined that case along with 29 others. And I was struck by the so-called Ticketmaster flywheel, a self-reinforcing business model that traps fans, artists, and independent venues in the Ticketmaster ecosystem. Can you just explain how that works and why this is so important for competition and for lower prices for consumers in the live music industry?
Well, I'm sorry to have to give you the same answer that I gave your colleagues on the other side of the aisle. We filed a case. We announced the complaint that at this point we can't comment on it. But the answers to your question, I think, are very well laid out in the very extensive complaint that we filed in that matter.
I was hoping to be able to brag about it, but I understand. And thank you so much for your service, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Mr. Attorney General, the public has seen through the claims you've made today about fair and impartial pursuit of justice.
Gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Mr. Attorney General, the public has seen through the claims you've made today about fair and impartial pursuit of justice. They see that Lady Justice's blindfold has slipped off, and they need look no further than the treatment by your department of former President Trump and current defendant Hunter Biden. I chair the subcommittee on responsiveness and accountability to oversight, and your office has gone a long way towards obstructing our efforts to investigate much of what we've talked about today. But beyond simply obstructing Congress, did allegations surface last year that senior Justice Department officials attempted to obstruct the criminal investigation into Hunter Biden's numerous alleged tax crimes?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question.
Did you attempt to obstruct the criminal investigation into Hunter Biden's alleged crimes?
Absolutely not.
According to IRS whistleblower Joseph Ziegler, on October 21st, 2021, U.S. Attorney Leslie Wolf told investigators they would be in, quote, hot water, unquote, if they interviewed Hunter Biden's adult children. And IRS investigators were prevented by DOJ from interviewing Hunter Biden's other relatives, including the president's brother and sister, Hunter Biden's in-laws, ex-wife, and Beau Biden's widow. Doesn't this depart from standard investigative procedure?
You asked me if I obstructed. I don't know virtually any of the people you just listed, other than because they've been in the newspaper. Mr. Weiss has testified about this matter. Mr. Weiss will testify again when the matter is completed. He will write a report. You'll be able to examine him for 5 hours if you want. But I don't know the facts of this matter, and I don't intend to intrude on Mr. Weiss's investigation. But it is false that I in any way obstructed Mr. Weiss's investigation. That's just false.
Did the DOJ allow the statute of limitations to lapse on some of the most serious?
I've testified about this before. Mr. Weiss will have an opportunity to explain which matters he decided to bring, which matters he decided not to bring. And I don't know any more about it than that.
Well, it's not that he decided to bring charges or not. He decided to allow statute of limitations to lapse on the 2014 and 2015 tax returns, even though prosecutors could have sought an extension. And in fact, defense counsel was willing to agree to extend the statute of limitations for these charges. Isn't that correct?
I don't know if anything you're saying is correct. Mr. Weiss will have to answer those questions, and I'm sure he will be able to when he appears before this committee.
It doesn't seem like you're aware of a lot that's going
That's
on in your
intentional
department.
with respect to Mr. Weiss's investigation. That's what an independent special counsel is about.
When did you
Attorney
appoint
General
special counsel?
doesn't
When did you
intrude.
appoint Special Counsel Weiss?
I'm sorry, say again?
When did you appoint Special Counsel David Weiss?
I don't remember the exact date. It's a matter of public record.
Isn't it correct that this was after IRS whistleblowers like Mr. Shapley exposed numerous instances of wrongdoing, including allowing the statute of limitations to expire?
The appointment of Mr. Weiss has nothing to do with anything any whistleblower said.
The statute of limitations was allowed to expire before your appointment.
Some of the statute of limitations likely expired before I was appointed as Attorney General. I don't know the facts here. They have no connection to each other.
So your claim that it should be, you can't comment on it because Mr. Weiss is currently investigating has nothing to do with, it's actually the fact that those statutes of limitations expired before you were appointed and before he was appointed. Correct?
I'm sorry. I'm not following the question.
All right,
There's no connection between whatever happened with the statute of limitation, which I don't know about, and my appointment of Mr. Weiss.
Did Special Counsel Weiss receive directions from your office regarding the details of the plea deal for Hunter Biden?
When I was nominated to be Attorney General, 2 members of the Senate publicly asked me to let Mr. Weiss continue in his role to which he had been appointed by President Trump. I promised that I would. Thereafter, more than a majority of the Republican members of the Senate asked me to appoint Mr. Weiss as special counsel.
Okay.
Ultimately, I did appoint him as special counsel. I promised not to intrude, and I stuck with my promise.
Let me ask you something you might remember. On May 23rd of this year, were you in attendance at a state dinner for the President of Kenya?
Yes, I was.
Did Hunter Biden also attend the dinner?
From newspaper reports, yes.
Did you and Hunter interact in any way?
I have never spoken to Hunter Biden in my life, as far as I know.
I yield the remainder of my time to the chairman.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Is the Department of Justice...
Mr. Attorney General, are you above reproach?
I'm not above criticism. I'm not sure what you mean by reproach, but of course you're totally free to criticize me, and I expect
Yeah, as
you will.
American citizens, we can criticize you. We can criticize all of our government employees, can't we?
Absolutely.
Because you seem to whine quite a bit today about being attacked or people challenging the decisions that you've made. I actually think that Daniel Greenfield, a contributor to Front Page magazine, may have said it best when he said that a justice system can survive those who challenge the prosecutors, but it can't survive those who prosecute the challengers, which is kind of the situation we're in with the Biden administration and you at the helm of the Attorney General's office. Attorney General Garland, in March, Chairman Jordan and I sent you an oversight letter requesting documents and information following the release of an undercover video indicating that the DOJ was working with the IRS to use artificial intelligence to surveil bank accounts of Americans in a clearly unconstitutional manner. The undercover video featured an IRS official privately admitting that the IRS had been using AI to spy on Americans' bank accounts en masse in real time. The IRS official further stated that the Department of Justice and Inspector General controlled this AI-powered warrantless surveillance system, not the IRS. Attorney General, would you agree with me that if the federal government were operating this form of financial surveillance program, there would be serious Fourth Amendment as well as other statutory and civil rights implications, considering that there is no individual probable cause and no search warrants are being obtained?
I would be stunned if the Justice Department has the kind of AI
capabilities
that you're talking about.
Would you agree with me that would you agree with me?
Learn about this.
Would you agree with me that if they were engaging in that kind of surveillance, it would have serious Fourth Amendment implications?
I can't understand the kind of surveillance that you're talking about. Fourth Amendment prevents unreasonable searches and seizures without a warrant. If that's what we're doing, then of course that would violate the Fourth Amendment.
Okay, so I would request that you go back and read the letter that Jim Jordan and I sent to you. That might clear up your confusion just a bit.
I'll be happy to do
Now, while the committee has been following up with the department about this matter for months now, the department only replied with a formal response to the committee late last week. In the department's response letter, a DOJ spokesman, the Assistant Attorney General Carlos Iriarte, stated that the department is, quote, not aware of the department using any AI program that reflects the description in our March 20th letter, end quote. But saying that the chief AI officer is, quote, not aware of the department coordinating with the IRS to use AI to unconstitutionally spy on Americans' financial records is very different from saying unequivocally that the department is not doing so. Why won't the department just give us a clear answer as to whether it is actually using AI to spy on American citizens' financial records?
I'll be happy to take your letter back, and apparently you already have received a letter. I'll take it back and we'll see whether we can get you a clearer letter for you.
I would appreciate that. I want to turn to another serious issue, the infiltration of our tribal communities by the Mexican cartels because of Joe Biden and Mayorkas's open border. As chair of the Subcommittee on Indian and Insular Affairs, I have heard from tribes across the nation about this issue. In your written testimony, you actually mentioned how the department is working with tribal partners to disrupt cartel supply chains and that the department is zeroing in on the Sinaloa and Jalisco cartels. However, in April, the president of the Fort Belknap Indian community testified to the department's failures, stating, quote, "We don't have help from the FBI, the Border Patrol, the DEA, that has jurisdiction on federal lands, which are reservations." Attorney General Garland, his testimony comes from a tribe where the Sinaloa cartel operates with near impunity in its region. Drugs have devastated the community, reservations have become part of the cartel supply chain, and the Mexican cartels are intimidating Americans testifying before Congress. Yet the FBI and DOJ are largely absent. The tribe's experience runs in direct contrast to your testimony. Have you been in contact with any of our tribes about the impact that mass illegal immigration, human trafficking, and drug smuggling are having on their members?
Not only have I been in contact with the tribes, I've been on the reservation in Montana and Alaska. The answer to your question is Congress is not giving us money for FBI agents to go into the reservations.
So this is Congress's fault that you won't do your job.
It's Congress's
This
fault.
is Congress's fault that you won't protect
I will do
our
my
reservation, that you won't protect our reservations from the consequences of the Biden and Mayorkas open border policies. That's Congress's fault, not theirs.
If you give us money for more FBI agents,
you need more
for the
money for FBI
reservations,
agents.
they will
How about
go
if
to
they
the
just
reservation.
enforce the border? How about if you ask them to enforce the border?
The time of the gentlelady has expired. The gentlelady yields back. Does Mr. Ivey have?
We're out.
Gentlelady yields back. Does Mr. Ivey have?
We're out on this side, but I would offer
Unanimous consent?
unanimous consent for two letters that may address Ms. Hageman's line of questioning. One is dated April 22nd, 2024, from the Department of Treasury, and it's addressed to you, Mr. Chairman. It's from Corey Tellez, who is the acting secretary, and the other is, she may have referenced, I'm not sure, from the Department of Justice to you, Mr. Chairman. It's from Mr. Uriarte. It's dated May 31st, 2024.
And I would ask for unanimous consent for an article, Cartels Infiltrating Native Reservations with Fentanyl, according to a tribal leader.
Thank you. Without objection. Gentlelady yields back. Gentlelady for Florida is recognized.
Good afternoon, Mr. Attorney General. This committee is well aware of your long tenure as an appellate judge on the D.C. Circuit and your time as an AUSA before that. And I am sure that you, like me, care deeply about the public confidence in our court system and specifically our judiciary. And you said something a few moments ago that I think is a very important principle. You said that judges put aside their personal views and their political views when they preside. And I agree that that is the expectation. Not that judges don't have personal or political views, but that judges set those beliefs aside when they consider and rule upon cases, and that they do so in a way that is impartial and consistent with the law. And so I'd like to discuss the recent increase in aspersions being cast at some of our Supreme Court justices, some of which we've heard repeated during this hearing. Public calls for recusal of justices based on conjecture and conspiracy about their political beliefs, and in fact, not even the supposed political beliefs of the justices themselves, but even more attenuated to the supposed political and personal beliefs of their wives. In your view, Mr. Attorney General, is it appropriate to attack the impartiality and integrity of the Supreme Court justices in this way?
So I'm going to have to say again what I said before, which is we have cases before the Supreme Court, so I'm not going to be able to comment on this. You haven't heard any aspersions cast by me, and you won't hear any. But all of our filings will be done in court, and I'll only speak about these matters in court.
So then let's discuss this not as it relates to the specific justices who have had their integrity attacked today, but more generally in the case of judges who are presiding. Now, in general, in your experience on the bench, did judges in the D.C. Circuit recuse themselves if they believed they had a conflict of interest?
Yes.
And in your experience, did they typically adhere to a very high standard of personal integrity?
Yes.
And do you have any reason to believe or any personal belief that the justices of the Supreme Court currently have any issues that would necessitate their recusal?
So you've now skipped over to the question, which I said I wouldn't be able to answer. I can't comment about the Supreme Court. We have cases in the Supreme Court right now, and all the time.
So let's talk about the matter of judicial security. So not long ago, we had Director Wray of the FBI appear before this committee, and I questioned him about the lack of FBI resources and focus being allocated to threats against the safety of judges and specifically Supreme Court justices in light of some of the alarming news in recent times. And one of the things that he pointed out, in fairness, was that the U.S. Marshals take a large role when it comes to the security of judges. But in your role, you have the unique opportunity to actually oversee both branches there. So I'd like to know more about what the department is doing related to threats against judges.
Okay, fair enough. So this is one I can talk about. With respect to the justices themselves, for the first time in history, an attorney general, namely myself, ordered that every justice get 24/7 protection for himself or herself and their families at their residence and on their travel. So I've assigned over 70 U.S. Marshals who are doing this daily, but because of rotations, it's involved almost 1,700 marshals across the country to provide immediate protection. Now, the FBI, both the marshals and the FBI investigate threats against the justice. This is in our highest priority band protection against the judges, protection against threats against justices and judges. And I'll be happy to provide you with the press releases of our charges. There have been threats against several of the justices, and we have brought cases against those who have threatened them. We have a lot of judges in the country, and we don't have enough marshals. So I'm sorry to say the same thing I said before, which is we need more money for the marshals for protection, because not only do they protect the justices, they have to protect the judges in courthouses in 94 districts in the United States.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back. We're up to. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Vermont.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Attorney General Garland, for being here today. I know it's been a very long day. And I just want to start by saying, may the record show that although I'm a Vermonter, I do not partake in cannabis products. But after today's hearing, I could understand why someone might want to actually pop a gummy. It is maddening to witness so many of my colleagues seeming to care more about propping up and protecting a convicted felon than protecting the rule of law. And last week was a district week, so I was back in my home district, and I got asked the following questions a lot, and this was from people from across the political spectrum, Democrats, Republicans, Independents. They asked me the same questions. Why do they protect him? And the him in question is, of course, the former president. And they asked me, are they true believers? Are they apologists? Are they enablers? Are they just scared about what's going to happen to them if they don't defend the former president? I don't know. But I do know history is going to reveal the answer. The truth will out. The truth will out. Now, I'd like to leave the land of make-believe and talk about something that really matters to my people back home, which is the fact that we have a crushing housing crisis in Vermont right now. And the last time you sat before this committee, less than a year ago, I applauded your remarks on DOJ's increased enforcement against corporate crime, and in particular, DOJ's actions to take on corporate consolidation, price fixing, collusion. And since coming to Congress, I've tried to focus a great deal on finding solutions to the nation's housing crisis, and in particular, what's happening in Vermont. In my home state, we saw a 12% jump in home prices over the last year. That's twice the national average and the highest yearly increase across all states. So part of the problem is lack of supply, but that's not entirely what's causing skyrocketing home prices. It's not just a lack of supply. There's corporate greed at work here too. So so-called property management software companies like RealPage and Yardi are making the housing crisis worse by facilitating unwarranted rent hikes by landlords. And I will say, you don't have to take my word for it. You can go right on the homepage of RealPage, which boasts that they increase rents for client landlords between 5 and 12% in every market in which they are coordinating prices. So in fact, one of the software developers told investigative journalists that leasing agents, quote, had too much empathy compared to computer-generated pricing. So this is how price-fixing cartels operate. So I know that DOJ is concerned about price fixing. You're concerned about this issue, and I know you can't speak on the particulars, but can you please talk in the abstract about the importance of price competition in markets and the role of antitrust law in maintaining competitions?
Yes. The theory is that if suppliers do not collude with each other, if they offer the price that East wants, and those customers then meet them in an equal marketplace, that will reach an efficient price that will be in the best interest of resource allocation, and particularly with respect to consumer prices.
And do you...
When they collude, when the suppliers collude, they create a monopoly price, which is not good either for the economy in general, but is certainly above the market price. And the kinds of things you're talking about in general, price collusion, which is exacerbated by data collection and logarithms that set suggested prices, that can lead to a price above the competitive price, which costs consumers more.
I thank you so much. I see that I'm almost out of time. Just want to end by saying what many of my colleagues have said before me. Thank you for coming today. Thank you for being willing to answer our questions. And I very much appreciate the expertise that you bring to your job. Thank you so much.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentlelady from Wyoming is recognized.
Gentleman from Texas is recognized. Mr. Moran.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Garland, thank you for being here today and for your testimony. It will come as no surprise to you that my constituents in East Texas are not pleased with the ATF under the ultimate authority of the DOJ, as you know, which is elected to implement some extremely stringent gun control policies. My colleague from the other side was mentioning some of those. Simply by administrative fiat and rulemaking, this includes things like the pistol brace rule that attempts to restrict millions of Americans, and in particular disabled veterans, from owning a firearm accessory that helps them discharge their pistols in a stabilized manner. The frame and receiver, or the ghost rule, as it's known, which expands the definition of several terms associated with firearms in order to subject them to regulation by the ATF. And the zero tolerance policy by the ATF against federal firearm licensed dealers, which really incentivizes those dealers not to cooperate with the ATF for fear of reprisal, because effectively that new rule allows the ATF to revoke the licenses of FFLs for simple technical and non-material paperwork. That's what I'm hearing from my dealers back home. And finally, the overly broad application of the, quote, engaged in business rule, which overextended the definition to, as the ATF now interprets, quote, even a single transaction or offer to engage in a transaction when combined with other evidence may be sufficient to require a license as an FFL, end quote. The rule states that, quote, absent reliable evidence to the contrary, individuals are presumed to be, quote, engaged in the business of dealing in firearms if their conduct falls within one of the ATF's specified presumptions, and those presumptions are not exhaustive, as you know. So it really flips the burden of proof and presumes that Americans engaged in conduct disfavored by the ATF are breaking the law unless they can prove their innocence, and that's simply turning, I think, it upside down. To what extent was your office involved in crafting or approving these policies?
Well, I approved all of those rules, and if you give me a minute, I'll go through each one so that you can explain to your constituents. So with respect to the brace, it does not apply to an arm brace applied by a disabled person or anyone else. The statute says if you have a rifle 16 inches or smaller intended to be fired from the shoulder, that it has to be registered. The shoulder braces, which are only used to fire from the shoulder, turn it into a short-barreled rifle. They turn a short-barreled pistol into a short-barreled rifle. And
well, we know that there's a short period of time, and I think your department has even admitted a short period of time within which folks had to register, and we had millions of people across America that were supposed to register, a lot of whom were serving overseas at the time and couldn't do it within the specified period. And in fact, we sent a letter that asked your department to extend the period of time, at least extend the period of time within which they could register, and you guys rejected that. But since you reviewed and approved all these, and I know that you're crafting these at the behest of the president, which is certainly your right to do, one of the things I can't wrap my head around is the fact that on one hand, the administration is saying it's cracking down on guns. That was a quote. But here in D.C., the U.S. attorney, also under your ultimate authority, actively chooses to let hardened criminals who commit crimes with illegal firearms walk away scot-free from their criminal actions. Under U.S. Attorney Matthew Graves, here's what has happened in D.C. His office has declined to prosecute 32% of the carrying a pistol without a license cases in 2023, up from 15% in 2018. 60% of those convictions in 2023 were misdemeanors, which is up from 25% between 2018 and 2021. This rose to 48% misdemeanor rate in U.S. Attorney Graves' first full year, and then 60%, a record high last year. Were you aware of these statistics?
Mr. Graves is an experienced former career prosecutor. It's impossible to make these judgments based on numbers. It depends on what the evidence is in the cases. My understanding is that those percentages have increased now, and that my information is that the crime rate in the District of Columbia in the first quarter of this year is now going down.
Have you had a discussion about why he's not prosecuting more gun crime here in D.C.?
He is putting huge priorities into prosecuting violent crime in the District of Columbia, and the Maine Justice has provided assistance from the FBI, ATF, and the marshals, as well as assistant U.S. attorneys from other locations to help him do that.
Well, I find it interesting that he's declined to prosecute 30% of the assault cases with dangerous weapons in 2022. He also simultaneously blames the crime lab for a lack of prosecution, but he takes credit for, quote, effectively building a makeshift Department of Forensic Science, while felony drug convictions are down 88% since 2017. Drug convictions, as you know, are one of the main ways D.C. targets gangs, crews that drive so much of the gun violence. I'm frankly in awe that D.C. and the department has allowed him to go that direction and not called him to the carpet for it. We need more prosecution of those gun crimes here in D.C. and elsewhere. I yield back.
The gentlelady from North Carolina is recognized for 5 minutes.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Attorney General, for your service, and thank you for your patience. I know.
The gentleman has expired. The gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Most Americans have grown sick and tired of this do-nothing MAGA Republican House of Representatives, which has failed to pass a single piece of legislation that lowers costs for families or addresses the southern border issue or other important issues. Instead of attacking real issues that matter, House MAGA Republicans fritter away time with rabbit hole investigations of Dr. Fauci and Hunter Biden, while simultaneously spinning webs of lies that seek to create public wrath against anyone who would dare to be involved in any effort to hold convicted felon Donald Trump accountable for his misconduct. The American people can see right through these distraction efforts. Attorney General Garland, thank you for your many years of service to our nation. Among other positions in the federal justice system, you have had an illustrious career as a federal judge, a judge of the United States Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit from 1997 through 2021, including as chief judge from 2013 to 2020. And you also served as chair of the Executive Committee of the Judicial Conference of the United States from 2017 to 2020. So I'm sure that you've had a lot of time to think deeply about the importance of judicial impartiality in a functioning democracy. I and 44 other members of Congress have called for Justices Thomas and Alito to recuse themselves in cases where they cannot be seen as impartial in the case seeking immunity for Donald Trump and others. Justice Thomas's wife played a major role in the Stop the Steal movement that culminated in the January 6th insurrection, and we recently learned that Justice Alito flew flags related to the Stop the Steal movement at both his residential home and his vacation home in 2021 and again in 2023, which directly ties him to the January 6th insurrection, to Donald Trump, and to efforts to overturn the 2020 election. We urged them to recuse themselves from related cases, and Justice Alito last week refused. Then last week, my colleague Jamie Raskin wrote an op-ed arguing that DOJ could petition the other 7 justices to require Justice Alito and Thomas to recuse themselves. That leads me to this question. Is the filing of such a petition with the Supreme Court something that the Department of Justice is considering?
I'm afraid I'm going to have to give you the same answer I've given to other members. The Justice Department can't comment on matters that are before a court, matters you're talking about before the Supreme Court.
I'm talking in terms of an independent petition, not related to any matter pending before the court at this time, but related to those matters.
Justice Department speaks through its filings on matters before the court, and that's all I can say about it.
Well, I'd like for the DOJ to at least consider that possibility. My next question, public reporting has revealed that Supreme Court Justices Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito have accepted gifts of luxury travel and lodging from billionaire benefactors and failed to report those gifts as required under federal financial disclosure laws. The Ethics in Government Act provides the Attorney General authority to investigate and take action against violations of the financial disclosure laws by members of the federal judiciary, even without a referral from the Judicial Conference. What can you tell us about Department of Justice efforts to investigate those high-profile violations by those 2 justices?
I'm afraid I'm going to have to say the same. As I said before, the Justice Department does not comment on whether it investigates or who it investigates or whether it should investigate.
Fair enough,
All
sir.
of our statements are reflected in court papers.
Fair enough. Threats on the judiciary are increasing, and this is frightening to the rule of law. Can you talk about the work that DOJ is doing to address this important issue?
Yes, the threats to the judiciary, threats to prosecutors, threats to law enforcement agents have all spiked significantly, and in some cases have accelerated from threats to actual violence. We have a threats task force engaged in investigating these matters. We intend to aggressively investigate and prosecute threats against our public officials, including members of Congress, of which the numbers have actually exploded in the past couple of years. Our democracy cannot continue if the people who make the democracy run are afraid, if they make their decisions based on fear of being threatened or of being assaulted. No democracy can survive under those circumstances, and we will do everything we can in our power to investigate, deter, and prosecute anyone who makes threats against public servants.
Time of the gentleman.
Thank you.
Yields back. The gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Attorney General, it would be inappropriate for you to opine on the nature of pending and active prosecutions, correct?
Yes, there's a Justice Department policy against making those kind of comments.
It's longstanding precedent.
Yes.
The reason why I bring that up, I have great respect for my colleague from New Jersey. I understand he is not a lawyer by training, and the world needs good dentists, so it's nothing against his career choices. But I will just simply say, I find it shameful to have to endure, and I can only imagine how you feel about it, Mr. Attorney General, the lectures from some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle about equal justice under the law or adherence to the rule of law to a man who has spent virtually his entire career in pursuit of upholding the rule of law. You talked a bit about your professional background. You started at the Department of Justice as a line prosecutor. I know you served as a special assistant prior to that, but the bulk of your early career at the Department of Justice was a line prosecutor.
Yes.
Drug trafficking, organized crime, violent crime cases.
Yes.
You then proceeded to become the principal associate deputy attorney general.
Yes. Long title.
Long title, important job. And in that capacity, you oversaw a series of very important criminal prosecutions, including the prosecutions connected to the Oklahoma City bombing. Is that right?
Yes.
You were nominated and you were confirmed on a bipartisan basis here in Washington, D.C., to the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals.
Yes.
You rose to chief judge of the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals.
I think that just meant I survived my colleagues, yes.
That may be, Mr. Attorney General, but what I can say with confidence is that you have a more distinguished record with respect to the fidelity to the rule of law than any member sitting on the dais here today on either side of the aisle. And I appreciate your integrity, your leadership of the department, and to be candid, your patience during the bulk of this hearing, which of course has focused on virtually every issue unconnected to the bulk of the work that is done by our nation's premier law enforcement agency. I've been in and out of this hearing. I believe it's correct that you haven't gotten any questions about cybercrime, let's say, for example.
That's right.
Fair enough. Or foreign espionage.
Right.
I know during your opening statement you talked about the decisive action that the Department of Justice is taking in coordination with the DEA and the FBI against cartels. Very few questions about that today from my colleagues, unfortunately, unless I'm wrong.
You're right.
A litany of work that's being done each and every day at the Department of Justice that has a real impact on people's lives in terms of keeping our communities safe, keeping Americans safe. This was supposed to be, I thought, an oversight hearing for the Department of Justice. And unfortunately, it has descended into a lot of rhetoric about conspiracy theories and the like. I think it's a wasted opportunity to actually engage with you and your department about the issues that the American people care deeply about. And so I will spend the remaining amount of my time left talking about an issue that's deeply important to me, and I know an issue that's important to you, which is the scourge of gun violence. And the department has taken a leadership role under your tenure in the last several years, particularly as it relates to implementing the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, which was a bipartisan bill that this Congress passed thanks to President Biden's leadership. And I wonder if you might just opine a bit or expound a bit on your work as it relates to gun violence.
Well, the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act has been extraordinarily helpful in our effort to combat gun violence. It's led to substantial numbers of prohibited sales of guns to minors who the statutes prohibit possessing because of conduct that they have engaged in. It's given us the authority to bring cases for straw purchasing that's led to crime guns and to gun trafficking to criminals, and in those ways has helped drive down the numbers with respect to gun violence. We have set up crime gun intelligence centers so that our state and local counterparts can trace guns that are found at crime scenes to determine whether they were used by serial killers, by serial shooters, to help us find out, to run the DNA off of the casings so that we can find hits on those people and arrest them and prevent them from committing further crimes. There's a host of things that the department has done. But the principal kind of violence we're worried about in the country is gun violence. That's what causes the enormous number of deaths we face every year.
I thank you, Mr. Attorney General, for your service to our country, and I hope you'll relay the same to all the folks at the Department of Justice, and I thank the chairman for his indulgence. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Alabama.
Time to the chairman.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Is the Department of Justice retaliating against whistleblowers?
No, that would be a violation of statute and a violation of
The
our...
Inspector General seems to think you are. I got this Management Advisory Memorandum dated May 2024, notification of concerns regarding the Department of Justice compliance with whistleblower protections for employees with a security clearance.
I've read the management memo. I think it's a good memo. It doesn't say we've been retaliated against anybody. It says that there have to be additional protections with respect.
Is it just pure coincidence that Marcus Allen's security clearance got reinstated today? Whistleblower came in front of this committee. Democrats disparaged this guy, called him conspiracy theorist. 27 months without his security clearance, and we find out today it's been reinstated?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know about the facts, anything about the facts of that case. Retaliation against whistleblowers is against the law, and it will be punished.
3 people who have come and talked to this committee as whistleblowers have had their security clearance taken. Marcus Allen gets his security clearance put back in place today. And the Inspector General says he's got concerns, doing an investigation as we speak about what's going on.
I'm sorry, the management memo that you're talking about does not conclude there was any retaliation against
No,
anybody.
he's putting you on notice that he's investigating.
Mr. Chairman, regular order.
The gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Garland over here. Do you want additional time to answer the chairman's questions or comments?
No, I've answered. We do not, if there is, it is the policy and the practice, if somebody has a complaint about whistleblowing, to go to the Inspector General. That's why the Inspector General is investigating it. The memorandum that the Inspector General issued does not say he concluded that anybody retaliated against anybody.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to submit for the record a Wall Street Journal article that appeared yesterday, June 3rd, titled Merrick Garland, 3 Special Counsels in the Justice Department Under Fire. And Mr. Garland, I'd ask you after this to go back and read this article. It talks about your long and distinguished career. I think the article really summarizes it by, open quote here, a sentence. It says, Garland has been driven by one mantra, follow the facts and the law, close quote. It's about your commitment in your history to the rule of law in this country. Thank you, sir. Today we're talking about a lot of issues, very important. This is our job, oversight. You know, if I pull back a little bit, think about what people back home care about. They care about safe streets, eliminating drugs, harmful drugs from our streets, consumer protection. So I'm going to ask you, can you highlight, talk a little bit about it, your actions, the efforts of the Justice Department to reduce violent crime in the United States, and more specifically, how you work with our local sheriffs, our local police department to reduce violent crime in our streets?
Yes, that is an important part of our obligation to protect the American people and America's communities. In 2021, soon after I became an Attorney General, I saw the statistics regarding the spike of violent crime that happened during the pandemic, and I knew that it was important that we do everything we can to drive that number down, both for the protection of the individuals who are hurt, but also for the people's sense of security in their communities and belief that the system will work on their behalf. So we issued a memorandum directing the strategy that we know worked and that worked in the last time I was in the Justice Department when I was a drugs and guns prosecutor, and then again when I was a prosecutor in Maine Justice. We cooperate with, we create task forces with our state and local law enforcement partners, sheriff's offices and police departments, so that the federal government can bring the benefits and advantages it has, sometimes money, sometimes technology, sometimes better statutes. And the sheriff's deputies and the officers on the ground can bring their knowledge of the community and their knowledge of the bad actors. So we can take the most dangerous criminals off the streets, the repeat shooters, those who are responsible for violence, the people running in gangs that cause violence. That we can bring cases both against individuals and against criminal organizations. That strategy.
If I can interrupt, you only have a minute and a half left.
The strategy has been successful. The homicide rate last year went down higher decline than in 50 years, and it is again going down this quarter by somewhere between 18 and 20%.
Thank you for that good work. You know, we talk about getting fentanyl off our streets, something very important to both sides of the aisle, everybody on Main Street. And you mentioned in your opening remarks that you put away head of a Sinaloa cartel, one of the kingpins there, drug pins. I sit on Homeland Security, and we know one way to get there is to take down these cartels, you know, put away the leadership. Can you explain a little bit about what else you're doing to go in that direction, to get these, what I would call terrorists, drug terrorists? How do we put them in prison, get them off the streets so they won't be organizing and selling drugs, fentanyl, in our country?
So the DEA has done extraordinary work worldwide in order to track these cartels and to provide the evidence that has led to the indictments of the Chapitos, the sons of El Chapo himself, and as I said just last week, the chief Sicario, the assassin and protector of the Sinaloa cartel. I've traveled to Mexico several times myself. My deputy has traveled several times herself. The DEA group has gone as well to persuade the Mexican authorities to make extraditions in these cases. Specifically with respect to El Nini, I made the necessary calls. My counterparts agreed, and they arranged for his extradition to the United States.
Thank you, sir, and I hope you continue the good work. Chairman, I yield.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Arizona is recognized for unanimous consent.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I have a few articles. One is the full transcript of President Joe Biden's interview with Time.
Objection.
Town Hall talking about the transcript from Biden's interview with Time is a mess.
Objection.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Former president's case from the current president.
Was there opposition in the Washington field office seeking a search warrant of Mar-a-Lago?
I'm hoping that there's always discussion in field offices about the appropriate approach.
Who gave the go-ahead to do the search?
I know that the reference to the special agent that was made earlier left out the conclusion of his transcript, which is he thought it was lawful.
Who gave the go-ahead to do the search warrant, to execute the search warrant on Mar-a-Lago?
Magistrate judge in the district approved.